Every country has its collection of creepy places, weird areas with uncanny atmospheres that make the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, or you find yourself beset by the uncomfortable urge to look over your shoulder. Canada has its fair share of spooky locales, many of which regular viewers may recall from previous videos on this channel. In this piece, we will revisit 57 of the creepiest places in Canada, from spooky lakes and weird islands to haunted hotels and legendary valleys. Enjoy. Number 1. The Screaming Tunnel. Beneath the Canadian National Railroad, on the northern outskirts of Niagara Falls, Ontario, in the very center of the quiet rural strip separating that city from northwesterly St. Catharines, runs a small limestone corridor known as the Screaming Tunnel. Built in the early 1900s for drainage purposes, this dark, 125-foot-long passageway, hidden away off Warner Road, not far from the Queen Elizabeth Highway and the Warner Methodist Cemetery beyond, its entrance shaded by overhanging vegetation, is the perfect setting for one of Canada's eeriest urban legends. According to local lore, the tunnel owes its name to a tragic event which took place around the turn of the 20th century. One night, a nearby farmhouse caught fire, and a woman or girl stumbled from the inferno, suffering from appalling burns. Her nightgown ablaze, the girl staggered into the tunnel, wailing as she walked, perhaps hoping to find help on the other side of the railroad. Before she could complete her journey, she collapsed and died in the middle of that rough-hewn underpass. Ever since, disembodied shrieks, as of a woman in agony, have been heard emanating from the tunnel at night. Legend has it that if you enter the Screaming Tunnel at midnight and light a wooden match, something will blow your match out, and a blood-curdling scream will reverberate throughout the passageway. Number 2. Oak Island. In the Atlantic Northeast, on the eastern shores of Nova Scotia, in the crook of Mahone Bay, lies a tiny forested isle known as Oak Island. Legend has it that in 1795, 3 local boys discovered a depression in the soil on the island's eastern end. Subsequent investigation revealed a deep hidden shaft broken at 10-foot intervals by log platforms. Convinced that a treasure of incalculable value lay below, generations of treasure hunters have attempted to get to the bottom of this so-called money pit, only to be thwarted by ingenious flood traps constructed by the shaft's mysterious builders. Drilling operations brought scraps of parchment and fragments of human bones up from deep beneath the money pit, but of the island's supposed treasure, precious little has been found. Over the centuries, Oak Island treasure hunters have reported all manner of unusual activity on the island. Hard-headed workmen and engineers have seen strange lights hovering over the island at night. Others have spotted mysterious balls of fire floating atop the water in neighboring Mahone Bay, glimpsed dark shadowy masses gliding through the island's forest, experienced terrifying nocturnal hallucinations while sleeping on the island, and heard disembodied shrieks issuing from the island swamp at night. Number 3. Lake Minnewanka. If you drive 15 minutes north of the town of Banff, Alberta, at the eastern end of Banff National Park, you'll come to a 3-mile-long glacial lake called Lake Minnewanka. Like other lakes with similar-sounding names in North Dakota and Michigan, Lake Minnewanka's wild-sounding appellation derives from an old Siouan Indian term, which translates to spirit water. Like the proximate Ghost Valley, Devil's Head Mountain, and Dead Men Hill, Lake Minnewanka is shrouded in mystery. One of the oldest and most widely disseminated legends surrounding this glacial body of water contends that the lake is home to some sort of monster. Although various versions of this legend have assigned different identities to the lake's mysterious inmate, prominent candidates including evil spirits and a predatory wild man who haunts the surrounding mountains, all agree that something powerful and otherworldly lives in or near Lake Minnewanka. One variant of this local legend contends that the monster is a giant fish. As a 1924 newspaper article put it, one of the first Indians who saw this lake did so from the summit of one of the highest mountains which surrounds it. In the lake, he saw an enormous fish, so large that, from where he stood, it appeared to be as long as a lake. Another version of this legend can be found in the Banff Trading Post, a historic gift shop established in 1903 by Canadian Renaissance man Norman Luxton. At the back of the shop is a glass case containing what appears to be the desiccated corpse of a merman. A note attached to this horrific exhibit describes an old stony story about a creature in Lake Minnewanka, which was half human and half fish. Every once in a while, the legend contends, visitors to the lake can hear voices and drumming coming from beneath the water, these mysterious noises ostensibly having some connection with the lake's monstrous resident. It must be mentioned that the atrocity on display in the Banff Trading Post bears striking resemblance to the Fiji mermaid, a stuffed chimera composed of the head and torso of a monkey sewn onto the body of a fish, which American showman P.T. Barnum once exhibited in his museum in New York City. Although the legend of Lake Minnewanka might have something to it, the abomination at the Banff Trading Post probably does not. This beautiful body of water at the edge of Banff National Park holds another secret, which only adds to its eeriness. Beneath the mirror-like surface of Lake Minnewanka lies an entire village, perfectly preserved by the frigid, glacier-fed waters. Once a small lakeside resort town, this forgotten settlement was completely submerged in 1941, when a hydroelectric dam was built on the lake for the purpose of supplying wartime Canada with much-needed electrical power. Number 4. The Isle of Demons. From 1507 until the mid-1600s, maps of Canada's east coast included this sinister-sounding island in the Atlantic Ocean, not far from Newfoundland. The isle was said to be large, beautiful, and uninhabited, its external charm belying a dark secret. Legend has it that the Isle of Demons was haunted by ghosts and evil spirits, and that if any of its human visitors ventured too far into its wooded interior, they made themselves vulnerable to its malicious spectral inhabitants. Sailors who passed close by the island claimed that they could hear a multitude of voices on the air, whispering incoherently. In the spring of 1542, the island became home to 3 French castaways, a young unmarried aristocrat named Marguerite de la Roque de Roberval, her lover, and her chambermaid. These 3 had all been passengers aboard a boat captained by Marguerite's elder cousin, Jean-François de la Roque de Roberval, a corsair whom King Francis I had appointed the first lieutenant general of New France, a French colony newly established by explorer Jacques Cartier at the site of what is now Quebec City. Marguerite, while accompanying Jean-François on his voyage to his new jurisdiction, at the encouragement of her chambermaid, reciprocated the romantic advances of one of the passengers. The lieutenant general learned of this illicit affair in the middle of the Atlantic, and, infuriated by his relative's scandalous behavior, resolved to maroon Marguerite, her lover, and her chambermaid on the first island he came across, which proved to be the infamous Isle of Demons. 3 years later, a crew of Basque fishermen spotted the forlorn figure of a half-starved woman walking along the island's lonely shore. Overcoming their fear that the woman might be one of the island's ghostly residents, they rowed over to investigate, and found Marguerite de Roberval, gaunt to the point of emaciation, clad in a filthy, tattered dress, yet very much alive. The fishermen rescued the unfortunate woman and brought her with them back to France. On the homeward journey, Marguerite explained how her 2 companions had succumbed to natural perils. She also told them how, every night she spent on that island prison, the gentle lapping of the tide was rent by the shrieks of the island's demonic inhabitants, who emerged from the shadows to caper just beyond the light of her campfire, torturing her with their ghastly noises. Despite a once widespread belief in its existence, the Isle of Demons began to vanish from European maps in the mid-1600s. Today, it is regarded as a phantom island, a fictional tale spun from travelers' yarns. Perhaps the Isle of Demons is nothing more than a 16th century fairy tale. Or perhaps there really is an island in the North Atlantic where demons prowl, waiting for some hapless explorer to venture inland from the island's lonely shores. Number 5. The London Asylum for the Insane. In the middle of London, Ontario, lies the rotting shell of an infirmary, which was once the living heart of the London Asylum for the Insane. This 1902 brick hospital initially served as a companion to an older and grander Victorian edifice, which was constructed in 1870 and demolished 98 years later. It was out of these two buildings that the asylum's first psychiatrists, Drs. Richard Maurice Buck and Henry Landor, subjected their patients to a variety of revolutionary treatments. Drs. Buck and Landor were firm proponents of the therapeutic benefits of exercise and fresh air, and assigned their patients manual labor on a farm just beyond the infirmary's walls, a treatment now considered ahead of its time. In an effort to treat certain antiquated maladies, on the other hand, they also performed gruesome surgeries on patients of both sexes, procedures now relegated to the shadowy annals of medical malpractice, the details of which this author considers too lurid to recount in this piece. After undergoing several name changes throughout the 20th century, the London Asylum for the Insane closed its doors for good in September 2014. Today, the doors and windows of the old infirmary are boarded up, creating a dark and eerie atmosphere for enterprising urban explorers. Number 6. Niagara Falls. Undoubtedly the most famous of their kind in the country, the Niagara Falls are a collection of 3 massive cataracts over which the Niagara River plunges. As the river straddles the Ontario-New York border, so too do the waterfalls. The largest of the 3 are the Horseshoe Falls, also known as the Canadian Falls, as 2/3 of them lie on the Canadian side of the boundary line. The American Falls, as their name suggests, rest entirely on the American side of the divide. The Bridal Veil Falls, the smallest of the 3, are also located on the American side. Taken together, these Niagara Falls comprise the largest waterfalls by flow rate in the world. Over the years, a number of people and objects have tumbled over these cascades to crash into the misty chaos below. In 1837, in the wake of the failed Upper Canada Rebellion, a group of rebels led by William Lyon Mackenzie, who hoped to create a Canadian republic independent of the British Empire, took refuge on Navy Island, just upriver of the falls. Their island camp was routinely supplied by an American steamboat called the SS Caroline, sent to their aid by the sympathetic US government. When the British learned of this development, a party of Canadian militiamen sabotaged the vessel, killing a member of its crew and driving off the rest, before allowing the current to carry it over the falls. In 1901, a 63-year-old schoolteacher named Annie Edson Taylor, in an effort to raise retirement money, went over the Horseshoe Falls in a barrel. To the astonishment of onlookers, she emerged from her wooden submarine on the other side, unscathed, save for a minor head wound. And every day, a number of fish go over the Niagara Falls of their own accord. According to some estimates, about 90% of them survive the fall. According to an old Iroquois legend, the first person to go over the falls was a young Seneca widow named Laluela. After losing her husband and suffering other misfortunes, the luckless woman decided to end her life. One day, she got into her canoe and paddled down the Niagara River with the intention of plunging over the Niagara Falls. No sooner had her canoe began its descent into frothy oblivion than Laluela was caught by Hino, the benevolent Iroquois god of thunder. The deity took the girl to his home behind the waterfall, where he and his sons nursed her back to health. Upon her recovery, the widow became the wife of Hino's youngest son. Together, the couple raised their family in a cave behind the waterfalls. From 1846 until the present day, Laluela's epithet, the Maid of the Mists, has been the name of various ferries which carry passengers along the Niagara River at the base of the falls. Some say that, if you look closely at the mist that drifts up from Horseshoe Falls, you can see the image of Laluela. Number 7. The Ottawa Jail Hostel. Now one of Canada's strangest hotels, this fortress of stone and iron once served as the city's main prison. This historical site is not just a place to stay. It's a window into a chilling past, where the anguished souls of bygone criminals are said to still serve time, carrying out their sentences from beyond the grave. As a maximum security prison, the Ottawa jail was notorious for its nightmarish living conditions. Petty offenders shared cells with hardened criminals, and cruel guards often murdered prisoners they disliked. Tortured shrieks echoed from dark, isolated cells, where dissidents spent months in solitary confinement, chained to the floor. Given all the suffering and death that occurred here, it's no surprise the Ottawa Jail Hostel is considered one of the most haunted places in Canada. Many of the ghosts at the Ottawa Jail are said to be far from friendly. Guests have reported ghostly thieves stealing their belongings, and staff members being slapped by invisible hands. In one chilling incident, a staff member lost several fingers when a heavy steel door inexplicably slammed shut on her hand. The jail's sanitation situation was appalling in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and disease ran rampant. Infected prisoners were often left to die in the quarantine room. Their bodies were then wrapped in sheets and either incinerated or buried in mass graves on the prison property. On quiet nights, the howls of these tormented souls are said to echo through an underground tunnel connecting the prison with the courtyard. Another haunted section of the Ottawa Jail is the secret staircase, which connected the prison to the home of the jail's governor. Some prisoners leapt from this stairwell, preferring death to the medieval horrors of the jail. In 1910, a group of prisoners even heaved their guard over the stairwell's railings, leading to his death. Other specters said to haunt the Ottawa jail include the so-called vampire ghost, supposed to dwell in the secret staircase, and the ghost of Patrick James Whelan, an Irishman who was hanged in 1869 for the assassination of politician Thomas D'Arcy McGee, some say unjustly. Some say that Whelan's spirit haunts his former jail cell to this day, unable to rest without a proper Catholic burial. Number 8. Pitt Lake. In the lower mainland of British Columbia, on Canada's west coast just east of the city of Vancouver, lies a large body of water known as Pitt Lake. Nestled in the southern end of the Garibaldi Mountains, Pitt Lake has loomed large in the minds of Canadian prospectors since the late 1800s, when a succession of miners are said to have returned from the wild country that surrounds it, bearing rich pokes of gold. Over the years, an alarming number of prospectors who have set out in search of Pitt Lake's legendary bonanza have disappeared in the Garibaldi Mountains. Disturbingly, the handful of prospectors who have returned from the mountains beyond Pitt Lake, claiming to have rediscovered some long-lost gold mine, died from some mysterious illness shortly after their return to civilization, leading some to suspect that the gold of Pitt Lake is cursed. Hand in hand with these mysterious deaths and disappearances are reports of strange animals seen from time to time in the Pitt Lake area. Sasquatch, the wild hairy giants of Coast Salish legend, have been spotted in the region with uncommon frequency. Other unusual creatures said to haunt the area include giant wolves, which loggers have observed watching their operations from the trees, and huge two-headed snakes resembling a preternatural monster of local native legend. Ghost stories featuring murdered prospectors and long-dead Indian medicine women complete the panoply of peculiarity which makes Pitt Lake one of the creepiest places in Canada. Number 9. Lac St. Anne. 5 hours north of Banff, and about an hour west of Edmonton, lies Lac St. Anne, Alberta, a large eutrophic lake connected with a fascinating tradition. For 133 years, thousands of Roman Catholics, most of them of Métis or First Nations heritage, have traveled to Lac St. Anne to bathe in its plankton-rich waters, hoping to benefit from the miraculous healing powers they are said to possess. Although the annual summer pilgrimage to Lac St. Anne is a Catholic tradition, belief that the lake is home to some extraordinary power predates the importation of Christianity onto the Canadian plains. Before 1795, when agents of the Hudson's Bay Company established Fort Edmonton on the shores of the North Saskatchewan River nearby, local natives purportedly told stories about a large serpent that lived in the lake, which whipped up strong currents and dangerous winds with the lashing of its tail. Another old stony legend tells of a Sioux chief who traveled to the lake from what is now North Dakota, following the throbbing of a mysterious invisible drum. He followed the sound to an island in the lake, where he came upon a beautiful woman in a buckskin gown, with feathers in her long black hair. After producing a miraculous vision, in which thousands of children could be seen standing on the lake's shore, the woman vanished. The names which the local natives applied to the lake reflected their reverence for the mysterious power they believed dwelled within it, both the Stoney and the Cree referring to it as Lake of the Great Spirit in their respective languages. Taking their cue from the natives, Hudson's Bay Company employees, who set up shop on the North Saskatchewan River nearby, called the body of water Devil's Lake. In 1844, a French-Canadian priest named Jean-Baptiste Thibault, who had traveled on horseback across the Canadian prairies 2 years prior to minister to the Métis and Cree at Fort Edmonton, established a Roman Catholic mission on the shores of Devil's Lake. Discontented with the diabolical epithet the HBC had applied to his backyard body of water, Thibault blessed Devil's Lake and renamed it Lac Sainte Anne, in honor of the grandmother of Jesus and the mother of the Virgin Mary. The religious pilgrimage for which Lac Sainte Anne is famous today began in the summer of 1889 during a particularly severe famine. Led by an oblate missionary named Father Joseph Lestonque, hundreds of Native and Métis Catholics descended on the lake on July 26th, the feast day of Sainte Anne, to pray for rain. After saying the rosary and the litany of the saints, some of the petitioners waded into the water to cool off. As they submerged themselves in the lake's murky waters, something miraculous happened. Many of those who had come to Lac Sainte Anne with illnesses and disabilities emerged from the water instantly and inexplicably cured of their afflictions. Ever since, Catholics from all over Canada and the United States have made annual pilgrimages to Lac Sainte Anne to pray and to avail themselves of the lake's healing power. One woman whose lifelong hip problem disappeared after washing herself in the waters of that sacred lake described her experience for a journalist in 1992, saying, "It's a funny feeling. It's just like something enters in you, and you feel like you could just float away. You feel light. It's the Holy Spirit entering your body. I felt like I could get up and run." Although spooky might not be the most appropriate description for the mystery that surrounds it, Lac Sainte Anne is certainly one of the most extraordinary lakes in Canada. Number 10. Devil Island, Lake Winnipeg. On the southeastern shores of Manitoba's Lake Winnipeg, not far from the mouth of the Winnipeg River, sits a tiny speck of land known as Devil Island, where, according to my Manitoban friend and fellow history enthusiast Morier Invictus, there once stood a cabin in which local Icelandic Canadian fishermen sometimes sought refuge when caught in bad storms. This cabin was said to be haunted, and was once associated with several ghost stories that have long since been lost to history. One strange story associated with Devil Island appears in folklorist Magnus Einarsson's 1991 book, Icelandic Canadian Oral Narratives. Einarsson heard this story from an Icelandic Canadian elder named Hallgrímur Staffeldt, who related it to him in an interview conducted in his home in Riverton, Manitoba, sometime in the late 1960s. According to Staffeldt, Devil Island owed its sinister reputation, in part, to the disappearances of two men in its vicinity. One of these was a rich businessman from the city of Winnipeg, who went fishing on the southeastern shores of Lake Winnipeg back in 1914. The man's empty canoe was later found afloat near Devil Island, with no trace of its wealthy owner in sight. The other unfortunate was a nameless native, whose particular fate Staffeldt did not recall. The island's notoriety was matched by that of a proximate ghost town called Welsh Harbour, which once boasted a sawmill. When the town was still a thriving community, 5 sawmill employees were killed on the job, and, according to local legend, returned to haunt their old workplace after death. Staffeldt went on to relate a story told to him by an Icelandic immigrant named Jonas, who was known throughout the region for the large pack of dogs he kept, consisting of both wolfhounds and sled dogs. One winter night, Jonas hitched his dog team to his sled and headed out over the frozen surface of Lake Winnipeg, intending to hunt for wolves around Devil Island. In the day, the area was a popular ice fishing destination, and at night, the small, undesirable fish left behind near the fishing holes attracted timber wolves, of which Jonas's wolfhounds would make short work. He traveled a lot at night, when there was moonlight outside, Stadfeld said. Well, as soon as it was past midnight, the moon clouded over so badly that he didn't see well enough, and it occurred to him that he should go into Welsh Harbor and have a rest. Jonas mushed his way to the old ghost town and ushered his dogs into an abandoned shack. Unfurling a thick blanket made from moose and bear hide, the wolf hunter made his bed by the door, hoping to catch any of his hounds that had an inclination to stretch their legs. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, Jonas's sleep was interrupted by the appearance of a gigantic arm, which reached in from the open doorway, grabbed his heavy blanket, and tore it away from him with apparent ease. For a brief moment, Jonas caught a glimpse of an enormous man standing outside the doorway, his features obscured by the darkness. Before he had a chance to react, his loyal wolfhounds lunged at the intruder and chased him toward the lake, leaving the meeker sled dogs cowering in the shack with their tails between their legs. Before long, the wolfhounds returned to the shack with their ears flat against their heads and the fur of their backs standing on end, snarling with fear and rage at the monster that had clearly driven them back to their master. Jonas, now wide awake, stood on the threshold of his shack, rifle in hand, peering into the night. Although he was unable to see the mysterious intruder on account of the darkness, his wolfhounds clearly did, and lunged in unison, snapping and snarling, perhaps when the giant turned his back to leave. Like before, they were soon put on the defensive, and returned to huddle around their master, baring their teeth at the menace in the darkness. Well, Stadfeld said, this goes on for the rest of the night. When it dawned, it occurred to Jonas that he should go out to see what kind of trail or tracks this thing had made. Not a single track in the snow, anywhere, except the trampling of the wolfhounds back and forth, down to the edge of the lake and back up to the doorway. No trail or any tracks in the snow. Number 11. Century Manor. Built in 1884, on what was then the outskirts of Hamilton, Ontario, Century Manor was the second major structural component of the Hamilton Asylum for the Insane, an institution initially established for the treatment of alcoholics. The story of Century Manor is an unusually grim one, even for an asylum. Newspaper articles published in the late 19th and early 20th centuries documented at least 9 suicides committed in the building, as well as several suicide attempts made by inmates who escaped the hospital. Century Manor was also the scene of several strange accidents and horrific crimes. One female patient fell to her death while attempting to escape out a window using a rope made of bedsheets, while another had her skull crushed by a falling elevator. One particularly troublesome inmate was allegedly beaten to death by orderlies, while another split open the head of the asylum's head baker with an axe. The staggering number of escape attempts, suicides, and violent crimes committed at Century Manor are more comprehensible in light of the appalling state in which the institution was kept. As one former inmate put it in a 1910 letter to members of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, "Your insane asylum in Hamilton is an outrage to civilization. Wretched, vile abuse is the order of the institution. I have seen patients pounded, choked insensible time and time again, until blood would run from their nostrils." Of all the dramas that unfolded on the stage of Century Manor, perhaps the strangest was that surrounding a fire which mysteriously broke out in the building's top floor on the morning of August 1st, 1911. Firefighters who battled the blaze claimed that 3 of the inmates whom they rescued from the burning building broke away from them and leapt back into the inferno. When the embers finally cooled, firefighters found 8 bodies among the ashes, including a paralytic who had burned to death in his cell, as well as 5 men huddled together in a small room, burnt to a crisp. The historic building shut its doors for good in 1995 and has sat derelict ever since, serving as a haunting reminder of Hamilton's dark and tragic history. Number 12. Virginia Falls. This magnificent 96-meter or 315-foot landmark, nearly twice the height of Niagara Falls, lies in the mountainous heart of northwestern Canada, at the edge of the Northwest Territories' border with the Yukon. Christened Virginia Falls in the summer of 1928 by British gentleman explorer Fenley Hunter, who named the landmark in honor of his daughter, This roaring cascade is perhaps the most spectacular feature in the storied Nahanni National Park, a place of myth and mystery, more popularly known as the Headless Valley. For centuries, the valley of the South Nahanni River, on which Virginia Falls lie, have been the setting of dark legends which tell of lost tribes, lost gold, evil spirits, and monstrous predators. One of the Nahanni's many legends pertains to Virginia Falls itself, or more specifically, to the limestone pillar which bisects its crown. Informally referred to as Mason's Rock, in honor of Canadian naturalist, canoeist, and filmmaker Bill Mason, this iconic spire is supposed to house the spirit of one of the Naha, a brutal mountain tribe, whose members raided the camps of the Slavey and Cascadene in the Liard lowland in ancient times. Legend has it that, in the mists of prehistory, when Dene warriors marched into the Nahanni Valley to put an end to the Naha predations once and for all, their ancient enemies were nowhere to be seen. All that remained of the Alpine marauders were the ashes of their campfires, still warm and smoking, and a curious rock newly perched atop Virginia Falls. Legend has it that Mason's Rock is the last remains of a fleeing Naha warrior, perhaps turned to stone by the evil wailing spirit that haunts the valley. Number 13. Niagara-on-the-Lake. This charming town, nestled at the southern tip of Ontario's Golden Horseshoe, where the Niagara River meets Lake Ontario, has been called the most haunted town in Canada. With a rich history that dates back to the War of 1812, every third or fourth building in the town's historic district is said to have its own resident ghosts, from the spectral soldiers set to patrol the parapets of Fort George to the phantom barristers who haunt the halls of the old courthouse. One of the town's more famous haunted locales is Brockamore Manor, a beautiful bed and breakfast that was once the home of Captain John Powell and his wife Isabella Shaw. During the War of 1812, Major General Sir Isaac Brock, a celebrated British commander, was often a guest at the Powell home. Legend has it that Brock fell in love with Isabella's sister, Sophia Shaw. The two became secretly engaged, but their romance was cut short when Brock was killed at the Battle of Queenston Heights in 1812. Heartbroken, Sophia Shaw never married and remained a recluse in the Powell home until her death. Today, guests at Brockamore Manor report strange occurrences attributed to Sophia's ghost. Some hear her singing near the stairs, while others have witnessed doors opening and closing on their own. Occasionally, visitors even report seeing the misty figures of a red-coated army officer and a Georgian lady arm in arm in the garden, believed to be the spirits of Isaac Brock and Sophia Shaw. Another of the town's more famous ghost stories is set in the Old Angel Inn. This English-style tavern, originally called the Harmonious Coach House, has been serving patrons since 1789. The inn's most famous ghost story dates back to the War of 1812, when Captain Colin Swayze, a British officer, fell in love with a barmaid at the inn. As American forces approached, Swayze hid in a barrel in the cellar to avoid capture. Unfortunately, he was discovered and killed by an American soldier's bayonet. The ghost of Captain Swayze is said to haunt the Old Angel Inn to this day. Staff banter is sometimes interrupted by the antics of some invisible prankster who seems to be following the conversation. One of the captain's most chilling appearances was made during the COVID-19 lockdown. Late one night, a motion sensor camera captured the image of a translucent white figure standing at the bar. On closer inspection, the figure resembled an early 19th century military officer. In addition to Captain Swayze, another ghostly figure, described as a Victorian-era woman with long dark hair and a heavy gray dress, has been seen floating through the inn's walls. This mysterious apparition has been witnessed by both staff and guests. Number 14. Bell Island. At the southeastern end of Newfoundland, a wild island province in Atlantic Canada, sits the relatively populous and picturesque Avalon Peninsula. At the peninsula's northern end is Conception Bay, and in the heart of Conception Bay sits Bell Island, a 6-mile-long strip of land, fraught with more creepy folklore than just about any other place in Canada. From 1895 until 1966, Bell Island was home to several underground iron mines. As might be expected, the 7 decades of drilling and blasting that took place beneath the island saw over 100 fatalities, and many more horrific accidents. Legend has it that many of those who lost their lives in the Stygian halls of Bell Island's underground world returned to haunt their old worksites. Before the last of the mines closed in 1966, it was reportedly not uncommon for miners to hear mysterious clinking issuing from tunnels deep beneath the surface, which witnesses likened to the sound of an iron pick tapping on rock. The surface of Bell Island is said to be just as uncanny as its underworld. The island's solitary marsh is purportedly home to a band of malevolent fairies, elusive little men and women who venture out from behind their preternatural veil to lure unsuspecting passersby to their strange otherworldly abode. And according to local legend, a patch of farmland called Dobbin's Garden is haunted by a frightening hag who chases those who trespass on her domain. On April 2nd, 1978, at about 11 o'clock in the morning, Bell Island was rocked by a tremendous sonic blast, accompanied by strange lights in the sky, the last and most spectacular of a succession of mystery booms to hit the Atlantic seaboard that year. Scientists who investigated the case blamed the event on a rare and mysterious meteorological phenomenon called ball lightning, a diagnosis which many witnesses refuted. Number 15. Turtle Lake. If you drive about 4 hours and 40 minutes due east of Lac St. Anne, you'll come to Turtle Lake, Saskatchewan, a long, narrow body of water which sits at the junction of the northern prairies and the boreal forest. Local tradition has it that the secluded body of water owes its name to an old Cree legend, which tells of a monstrous aquatic animal that inhabits its depths. This creature was said to have made its home in 3 especially deep pockets of water near the lake's eastern shore, off a promontory called Indian Point, which Indians made a point to avoid. According to Cree elder Catherine Okene, whom journalist Catherine Lawson quoted in an article in the November 9, 1981 issue of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan Star Phoenix, it was said if you went around that area, you would never come back. Not content with a consignation to the misty confines of Cree mythology, the monster of Turtle Lake has made its presence known to local whites for as long as any living resident of that quiet Saskatchewan backwater can remember. In the winter, it tears huge holes in the nets of fishermen, and in the summer, it occasionally breaks the surface of the water to frighten swimmers and boaters. Eyewitness portrayals of the monster are roughly consistent, and decidedly non-Turtle Lake. The creature is usually described as having a length of 3 to 9 meters, or 10 to 29 feet, with smooth or scaly skin, of black or gray complexion, with or without a long fin along its back, and with a bestial face, resembling a dog, horse, or pig. Some witnesses liken the creature to an animated log, while others have described seeing 3 distinct humps on its back. Most residents of Turtle Lake who have an opinion on the matter suspect that the monster of Turtle Lake is probably a freakishly large sturgeon, despite that no member of that piscine species, big or small, has ever been caught in the lake. A minority propose that the creature might be a relict freshwater plesiosaur, a long-necked, large-bodied aquatic dinosaur, which most paleontologists agree went extinct long ago. And many more refuse to speculate as to the creature's identity, yet remain firmly convinced of its existence. Number 16. Devil's Island, Lake Winnipegosis. West of Lake Winnipeg are 2 large bodies of water that parallel it, one lying directly north of the other, which together run up the length of the province. The southern lake is called Lake Manitoba, and the northern Lake Winnipegosis. On April 7, 2020, my friend Morier Invictus told me about another Manitoban isle with a diabolical epithet, namely Devil's Island, which sits off the northeastern shores of a long peninsula near the southern end of Lake Winnipegosis. Morier told me an old family tale about this sinister island, which he generously allowed me to publish here for the first time. The following is Morier's story, in his own words. My dad's mother is Icelandic, and the Icelanders are very superstitious people. In the 1880s, my Icelandic side of the family came to Manitoba due to starvation caused by volcanic eruptions on Iceland. The Icelanders who settled in Manitoba on the lakes were commercial fishermen by trade, and my great-great-uncle, Big Leo, was one such man. The story goes that one day, as he and his two fishing partners were on Lake Winnipegosis, they were caught in a storm in the middle of the lake, off of Camberville being a small Métis community on the lake's southwestern shore. They managed to make it to Devil's Island, where they intended to wait out the storm. This was not long before World War I, so circa 1910 to 1913. It so happened that on Devil's Island, there's a fishing/trapping shack. It had been built years before, but apparently there had been a grisly murder there sometime in the 1800s. The shack was a single-room affair with a table and chairs, wood stove, and a small loft where one could place bedding for sleeping. Big Leo and his companions were actually pretty pleased that they were able to find shelter until the storm passed, so they decided to spend the night. So they made up their beds in the loft and fell asleep. In the early morning hours, they awakened to the sound of a man screaming. Jolted awake, the three men looked at each other and quickly realized that none of them had made the scream. They then looked down to the floor below, from the loft, and watched the apparition of a headless man running around a table and right through the closed door of the shack leading to the outside. The shack is now long gone, but campers on the island insist that strange lights, apparitions, and screams can still be encountered on Devil's Island off Camberville in Lake Winnipegosis, Manitoba. Number 17. The Charles Camsell Hospital. In the city of Edmonton, Alberta, in the heart of the historic Inglewood district, stands a huge empty building called the Charles Camsell Hospital. Named after a great Canadian geologist and politician, whom some readers may recall from my book, Legends of the Nahanni Valley, this ghoulish landmark was built in 1967 on the ruins of an older Jesuit school turned infirmary to house Indigenous tuberculosis patients from reserves across Alberta and the Northwest Territories. As might be expected, many of the consumptives who came to the hospital racked by the ravages of that Great White Plague never lived to be discharged. Although a surprising number of the hospital's long-term patients have described the Charles Camsell as a home away from home, in which many happy memories were made, the Edmonton Infirmary was also the scene of several well-documented atrocities. In addition to those lesser delinquencies, which regrettably seem to pervade all medical institutions, like abuse inflicted by heavy-handed orderlies, or the administration of excessively harsh shock therapies, the halls of Charles Camsell were tainted by the abomination of forced sterilization. From the hospital's founding until the 1972 repeal of Alberta's barbaric Sexual Sterilization Act, hundreds to thousands of native patients of the Charles Camsell, whom physicians diagnosed as mentally deficient, were sterilized against their will. In 1993, after nearly 2 decades of employment as a general hospital, the Charles Camsell was vacated and left to decay. Today, the old building appears empty and lifeless, its parking lot weed-ridden and its windows dark. Despite its desolate exterior, however, some say that the tortured souls of some of its former inmates still haunt its halls. One of those who witnessed some of the uncanny happenings which gave the Charles Camsell its haunted reputation is my own cousin, who had a chilling experience while working there as a security guard some years ago. What follows is his story in his own words, published with his permission. The 2 stories that come to mind are being on patrol around 2 a.m. and hearing a noise from inside the building. At that point it was condemned and shuttered, so there was no access inside unless you were already there. And my eyes shot up to about the 4th story, halfway across the columned windows, where I saw, for a moment, a ghostly apparition of a little girl in a pearl-white dress, gazing down at me before she vanished. It haunted me for a long time. The other story is being on patrol, back when you could still go inside the building before it was condemned. I was walking through a long hallway covered in trash, broken medical equipment like gurneys, IV poles, and rotten newspapers, quipping to my partner about the artwork on the walls, which consisted of pentagrams, which appeared to be drawn in blood, monsters scratched into the brick walls, and other graffiti creatures and animals, all of which instilled fear into both of us. Not soon after, while we continued down this dark and dreary hallway, we saw a large desk, like a secretary office maybe 15 feet in front of us. It had long been abandoned, and the building had been unoperational but not yet shuttered for a long time. My partner and I got within a few feet, and were about to round the desk to continue our interior patrol of the building, when a phone on the secretary desk rang. I don't think it hardly rang a second time before my partner and I had cleared the hallway back the way we came, and were breathing heavily as we sprinted back to our vehicles, not letting up our speed until we were at least a few blocks away driving. That one also bothered me for a long time. It is interesting how the details come back as I write this. I haven't thought of it in a long time, but I do remember it quite well when I think back on it. Number 18. Bloody Falls. Another northern cascade with a gruesome history. This tundra rapid, located near the mouth of the Coppermine River in northwestern Nunavut, owes its sanguinary sobriquet to a massacre which took place there in the summer of 1771. The previous December, Hudson's Bay Company explorer Samuel Hearne set out on snowshoe from Prince of Wales Fort, a frozen stone fur-trading fortress on the shores of Hudson Bay, Manitoba, with a band of Chippewayan Dene, tasked with exploring an Arctic waterway which would come to be known as the Coppermine. During the course of their northwestern journey, Hearne and his native guides were joined by Yellowknife warriors who hoped to do battle with the Copper Inuit of the Arctic Circle. In mid-July, the combined party discovered an Inuit camp which they resolved to attack. Hearne was forced to watch with helpless horror as his traveling companions, on a mosquito-infested summer night, crept into Eskimo tents pitched on the banks of the chute that would come to be known as Bloody Falls. In a few seconds, the horrible scene commenced, Hearne wrote in his memoir. It was shocking beyond description. The poor, unhappy victims were surprised in the midst of their sleep, and had neither time nor power to make any resistance. Men, women, and children, in all upwards of 20, ran out of their tents stark naked and endeavored to make their escape, but the Indians having possession of the landside, to no place could they fly for shelter. The shrieks and groans of the poor, expiring wretches were truly dreadful, and my horror was much increased at seeing a young girl, seemingly about 18 years of age, killed so near me that when the first spear was struck into her side, she fell down at my feet and twisted round my legs so that it was with difficulty that I could disengage myself from her dying grasps. As 2 Indian men pursued this unfortunate victim, I solicited very hard for her life, but the murderers made no reply till they had stuck both their spears through her body and transfixed her to the ground. Then they looked me sternly in the face and began to ridicule me by asking if I wanted an Eskimo wife, and paid not the smallest regard to the shrieks of agony of the poor wretch who was twining round their spears like an eel. My situation and the terror of my mind at beholding this butchery cannot easily be conceived, much less described. Even at this hour, I cannot reflect on the transactions of that horrid day without shedding tears. Number 19. The Rocky Mountain Grand Railway Hotels. Nestled in the heart of Canada's Rocky Mountains are 3 grand railway hotels: the Fairmont Banff Springs, the Fairmont Chateau Lake Louise, and the Prince of Wales Hotel at Waterton Lakes, all of them synonymous with grand architecture and rugged luxury. Behind their majestic facades lie eerie tales of restless spirits and brushes with the supernatural. The Banff Springs Hotel, a Scottish baronial castle overlooking the town of Banff, Alberta, opened its doors in 1888 at the behest of William Cornelius Van Horn and the Canadian Pacific Railway. This icon of the Canadian Rockies has since played host to numerous celebrities and dignitaries over the years. Reportedly, some of its many guests never checked out. One of the hotel's most chilling stories revolves around the sealed room 873. Legend has it that a man murdered his wife and young daughter in that room before taking his own life. Subsequent guests reported terrifying screams and finding bloody fingerprints on mirrors that couldn't be wiped away. The room was sealed, but the spirits are said to still haunt its vicinity. Another ghostly figure is Sam Macaulay, a bellman who vowed to return after his death. Incidents in which guests were reportedly helped by an elderly Scottish bellman in an outdated uniform have been attributed to Sam's ghost. The most famous spectral resident of the Banff Springs Hotel is the Ghostly Bride. Hotel lore has it that, in the 1930s, a young bride tragically fell to her death after her wedding gown caught fire on a staircase. Her apparition has been seen dancing in the Cascade Ballroom and ascending the very staircase where she met her end. Just a 40-minute drive from Banff, the Chateau Lake Louise offers its own spine-chilling stories. This grand hotel, standing proudly by the beautiful glacial lake, is no stranger to ghostly encounters. An infamous haunted elevator near the staff cafeteria opens and closes by itself. According to hotel lore, a young boy tragically fell to his death in the 1920s or 30s, and his spirit lingers there today. Staff members have also reported seeing an ominous figure in a hallway mirror and experiencing unexplained physical contact, attributed to a bride-to-be who hanged herself after discovering her fiancé's infidelity. The 8th floor is another hotspot for paranormal activity, where guests have encountered an elderly woman in outdated clothing and sudden, intense cold spots. These eerie manifestations are believed to be linked to the hotel's storied past. The most notable ghost is Thomas Edmunds Wilson, a frontier explorer. His spirit is often seen gazing out at Lake Louise, or walking through the kitchen, half disappeared into the floor due to structural changes since his time. The Prince of Wales Hotel, perched on a windswept hill in Waterton Lakes National Park, is also steeped in ghostly lore. Built in 1926, it attracts visitors with its stunning views and mysterious past. Room 608 is said to be haunted by the wife of a former chef, who was reportedly murdered by her husband. Guests staying in this room have reported being tucked into bed by invisible hands. The Royal Stuart Dining Room is another of the hotel's haunted rooms, where the smell of phantom tobacco smoke sometimes wafts through the air. This is believed to be a manifestation of the ghost of Captain Rawdon S. Harrison, the hotel's first manager, who reportedly loved a good cigar. The Lady in White, a tragic figure, haunts rooms 510 and 516. Legend says she was a chambermaid who took her own life after a failed romance. Her ghost is known to lock windows, run taps, and blow icy breath on unsuspecting guests. It is likely that this legend is connected with a tragic incident which took place in 1977, when a young gift shop employee named Lorraine leapt to her death when the object of her romantic desires spurned her affections. Her spirit is said to roam the halls, still searching for the love denied her in life. Number 20. Green Lake. In south-central British Columbia, at the edge of what is known as Caribou Country, lies a lonely body of water called Green Lake. Regionally renowned as a fishing destination, this unassuming wilderness retreat quietly played host to a number of strange and disturbing events throughout the latter half of the 20th century. For as long as tourists have visited Green Lake, outdoor sportsmen have reported seeing freak cyclonic winds create perfectly circular patterns in the marshy vegetation which grows at the lake's edge. On August 20th, 1966, a 9-year-old boy named Clancy O'Brien vanished from a hill overlooking Green Lake, while playing with 2 cousins and his younger brother. Despite the enormity of the search and rescue operation that ensued, in which aircraft and tracking dogs were employed, and 29,000 man-hours logged, the missing boy was never found. Throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, visitors and area residents alike reported seeing multifarious phantom lights hovering or flying over Green Lake at night, some of them pulsating and colorful, others appearing as bright white flashes, and others still resembling aerial balls of fire. One night in the winter of 1974, a tourist from North Vancouver came across large, deep, human-like footprints with a length of 2 or 3 feet and a stride of about 4 feet in the snow near the southern end of Green Lake. In the nights that followed, he and his wife heard hair-raising howls in the woods behind their cabin, and found strands of long, coarse hair caught in trees when they inspected the area in the day. And in the spring of 1978, a mysterious 150-foot circle of scorched earth appeared overnight between Green Lake's southern shore and a more southerly road. The rocks within the circle had inexplicably turned chalk white. Number 21. Old Wives Lake. At the opposite end of the Saskatchewan prairies, south of the city of Moose Jaw, lies Old Wives Lake, the second largest saline lake in Canada. An island in this lake, called the Isle of Bays, for the unearthly howls which occasionally emanate from there is said to be haunted by the spirits of old Cree women who were massacred on the lakeshore long ago, in the event which gave the lake its strange name. A roadside sign erected by the provincial government just east of the lake tells one version of the story. An Indian legend from the 1800s, the sign reads, reveals how Old Wives' Lake to the west was named. One winter, a Cree party went beyond their traditional area in search of buffalo. They ventured into territory claimed by both the Cree and Blackfoot. The Cree were rewarded by a successful hunt. At their lakeside camp, they were surprised by a Blackfoot war party. After a brief skirmish, the Blackfoot went back into the hills to wait for dawn. The Cree fires burned into the night as they decided what to do. The old Cree women suggested that they stay and tend the fires, allowing the rest of the Crees to get away. At sunrise, the Blackfoot were enraged to find only the grandmothers tending the fires. It is unlikely any women survived. The Cree called the lake Notaku for the old women. On windy nights, you may hear the old wives' laughter, mocking their Blackfoot enemies. Number 22. Dead Man's Island. In the middle of Cole Harbour, between downtown Vancouver, British Columbia, and Stanley Park, lies Dead Man's Island. As its name suggests, this small west coast isle has seen an inordinate amount of bloodshed and pestilence over the centuries, and is said to be haunted by the souls of those who lost their lives on its rocky shores. Some say it is the most haunted island in Canada. According to an old Squamish legend, a great Indian battle took place on Dead Man's Island long ago. Indigenous Canadian author Emily Pauline Johnson, who first heard the tale from the famous Squamish chief Joe Capilano, included a dramatic rendition of this legend in her 1911 book, Legends of Vancouver Island. In this version of the story, the battle was fought between a tribe from the north and a tribe from the south. Although the northern warriors were better fighters than their southern enemies, the southerners were crafty. One night, a party of southern braves snuck into the northern camp and kidnapped many wives, children, and elders, corralling them into their island camp. At dawn, they threatened to execute their hostages unless an equal number of northern warriors volunteered to give up their lives in their stead. Amazingly, the northerners consented to this terrible ultimatum, 200 warriors willingly throwing down their weapons and walking boldly into the hands of their enemies. Out before a long file of southern warriors they stood, Johnson wrote, their chins uplifted, their eyes defiant, their breasts bared. 1,000 arrows ripped the air, 200 gallant northern throats flung forth a death cry exultant, triumphant as conquering kings. Then 200 fearless northern hearts ceased to beat. The gruesome exchange having been made, the northerners retreated in their canoes, and the southerners retired to their island camp, both parties leaving the bodies of the sacrificial victims lying where they fell. The following morning, the southern warriors discovered that the bodies of the slain had disappeared, and that in their place grew a profusion of fireweed. Terrified, the southerners fled to their canoes and abandoned the island. In the 1860s, Dead Man's Island attracted the attention of John Morton, one of the 3 English veterans of the Cariboo Gold Rush, who bought up land in what would one day become Vancouver's West End, known locally as the 3 Greenhorns, for their apparent lack of real estate savvy. In 1865, Morton rode out to the island for the purpose of assessing its potential as a land asset, and found painted, age-silvered cedar boxes suspended in the trees, unmistakable evidence of a Squamish burial ground. On the advice of Chief Capilano, who told him the same legend he later told Johnson, Morton abandoned all plans of purchasing the island, loath to desecrate the Indians' sacred grounds. In the ensuing decades, Dead Man's Island served similar macabre functions, being employed as a pioneer cemetery and as a sanatorium for smallpox patients. Since 1942, it has housed the HMCS Discovery Naval Station, whose personnel have reported hearing phantom footsteps, the scraping of moving furniture, the opening and slamming of doors, and even fragments of disembodied conversations in the middle of the night when no one else was on the island. Some visitors to the island have returned with stories of disembodied shrieks issuing from the forest. glowing red eyes peering at them from behind trees, and an eerie glow that sometimes hangs over the old burial ground. Undeniable proof, some say, that the dead of Dead Man's Island wish to be left in peace. Number 23. The Rideau Regional Center. In the town of Smiths Falls, Ontario, on the banks of the storied Rideau River, stands a multi-purpose facility called the Gallipo Center. Although this building now houses apartments, a theater, and a swimming pool, it was until recently one of Ontario's eeriest abandoned asylums. Constructed in 1951, the Rideau Regional Center, as the building was once called, served as a care home and school for people with cognitive disabilities. This institution, the oldest of its kind in the province, was purportedly an overcrowded house of horrors, where staff neglected many of the residents under their care, and routinely abused others with impunity. In 2016, an Ontario court awarded $36 million in pecuniary damages to former inmates who had suffered abuse or neglect at the hands of staff members. On March 31, 2009, the Rideau Regional Center was abandoned, and for over a decade existed in a state of neglect, mirroring that of the residents it once housed. The vibrant community which exists in the refurbished Gallipo Center masks the years of decay and corruption that are the heritage of the Rideau Regional Center. Number 24. Montmorency Falls. Known as the Chute Montmorency to the French-speaking residents of Quebec, this towering 83-meter, or 272-foot cataract is located less than 7 miles of the St. Lawrence from the heart of Old Quebec City, just west of the southernmost tip of the Ile d'Orléans, at the mouth of the Montmorency River. For centuries, visitors of this breathtaking feature have spotted a woman in a white gown, weeping in its vicinity, either sobbing on the heights atop the cascade, or walking listlessly at its base, before vanishing into thin air. Some have purportedly watched this forlorn figure hurl herself from the precipice and disappear into the spray below, prompting phone calls to the local police. Legend has it that this disturbing apparition is the ghost of 16-year-old Mathilde Robin, a local maiden whose tale is set in the 7 Years' War, when France and Britain were locked in a deadly struggle for global supremacy. At that time, Mathilde was engaged to marry a local habitant named Louis, whose surname is variously given as Tessier or Gautier. Their wedding was to take place in the summer of 1759, and in preparation for the event, Mathilde busily employed herself in sewing her own wedding gown. By June, British troops had ensconced themselves at Point Levis, across the St. Lawrence from Quebec, in preparation for an imminent assault on the city. Louis patriotically enlisted in the Canadian militia, and spent his days building entrenchments on the banks of the St. Lawrence, under the command of General Louis-Joseph de Saint-Véran, Marquis de Montcalm. When duty permitted, however, he and his fiancée rendezvoused on the heights atop the Montmorency waterfall, away from the prying eyes of the soldiers on the hills below. On the night of July 9, 1759, General James Wolfe, who had famously clashed with Montcalm in the decisive Battle of the Plains of Abraham 2 months later, landed 4,000 British regulars on the northern shores of the St. Lawrence and established a camp just east of the Montmorency Falls. On July 31st, the British launched their attack on French artillery batteries east of the city near the village of Beauport, bombarding them with cannon fire from the Montmorency Battery and warships in the St. Lawrence, while Wolfe's regulars forded the Montmorency River beneath the waterfall. The redcoats who made it to the western shore marched uphill toward the French entrenchments, into a hail of musket balls fired by the Canadian defenders. During the attack, a heavy rain descended on the battlefield, dampening the gunpowder of both the French and the British, and rendering the hill too slippery for the redcoats to climb. Recognizing the futility of further engagement, Wolfe withdrew his troops, conceding defeat in what would come to be known as the Battle of Beauport. Legend has it that Louis was one of the 60 Canadians killed in this engagement. Upon learning of his fate, a heartbroken Mathilde is said to have donned her new wedding dress, climbed to the top of Montmorency Falls, where she and her betrothed had spent their happiest moments, and threw herself into the torrent. Ever since, her tortured spirit has wandered the vicinity of the waterfall, lamenting her lost love. Number 25. Cobalt in Lake Temiskaming. In the remote heart of the Canadian Shield lies Cobalt, Ontario, a town born from a silver rush in the early 20th century. This isolated community has since become a hotbed of strange and eerie tales. One of the town's most famous legends is that of Old Yellow Top, a yellow-headed wild man spotted on 3 separate occasions throughout the 20th century. Cobalt's eerie reputation is not only rooted in wildman sightings, but is also tied to the rugged geography and rich indigenous folklore of the surrounding area. The region, traditionally inhabited by the Ojibwa, Cree, and Oji-Cree First Nations, is steeped in stories of the Wendigo, a giant with a hunger for human flesh, and hairy preternatural dwarves believed to inhabit neighboring Lake Temiskaming. One legendary haunt of these diminutive creatures is Devil's Rock, a cliff which overlooks the lake, which has its own attendant myths regarding an ancient evil Manitou. Lake Temiskaming itself is home to its own legendary creature, the Mugwump. This mysterious lake monster, first brought to public attention in a 1979 article in the North Bay Nugget, has been described by various witnesses as a massive sturgeon-like creature. The legend of the Mugwump is bolstered by reports of fishermen getting strange readings on their fish finders, and sightings of a large, unidentified animal in the water. Other mysteries from the region include the enigma surrounding an old painting entitled The Shadow of the Cross, which is supposed to miraculously transform in the dark, and the tale of an old abandoned cabin, once owned by a long-dead native, from which early 20th century miners heard the ghostly strains of a stringed instrument. Number 26. Comorant Island. Near the northern tip of Vancouver Island, on Canada's west coast, sits a small crescent-shaped isle called Comorant Island. Heavily wooded with old-growth Pacific forest, this sparsely inhabited island is home to a tiny Kwakwaka'wakw Indian village called Alert Bay, the latter owing its name to the body of water on which it sits. In 1928, a man named T.R. Boggs saw what he believed to be a sea serpent swimming in the ocean off Alert Bay. He described the creature as having a camel-like head, which was raised 5 or 6 feet out of the water, and a long tail with visible humps. His description accords perfectly with a classic portrait of a sea monster called Cadbrosaurus, so named for its supposed haunt at the southern end of Vancouver Island, Cadbro Bay. More recently, in the autumn of 2015, Comorant Island attracted national attention when a resident of Alert Bay recorded mysterious, blood-curdling howls, which were clearly distinct from the howls of a wolf, emanating from the island's forest at night. Subsequent journalistic inquiries revealed that eerie nocturnal howling was not uncommon on the island, and was universally attributed to the Sasquatch, the elusive hairy giant of native legend. While conducting interviews with Alert Bay natives, journalists discovered that the creature had been spotted by many island residents over the years, most of whom, in true native fashion, were reluctant to broadcast their encounters. Number 27. Wallich Lake. Scattered throughout the province of British Columbia are a handful of secluded lakes, which both the interior Salish Indians of the Interior Plateau and the Coast Salish of the Pacific Northwest traditionally regarded with fear and respect. These places were said to be saturated with dangerous preternatural power, which manifested in the form of bizarre apparitions, or unnatural-looking creatures, which one old legend attributes to the spirits of ancient evil medicine men who drowned in a great flood long ago. When passing these lakes, natives painted their faces black or red for protection, and averted their gaze from the water, lest they catch a glimpse of some shocking or death-dealing apparition. The interior Salish called these places land and water mysteries, while the Coast Salish referred to the strange beings that could be seen there as slolokums. Anthropologist James Tate described several water mysteries in his 1900 ethnological treatise on the Thompson Indians. One of these was Devil's Lake, a small body of water in the Lillooet Mountains, which appears in our video on the top 10 creepiest places in Canada. Another is a nameless lake which Tate described thus: a lake in the mountains near the country of the Coast Tribes has never been known to freeze over, no matter how cold the weather. There is sometimes seen on its waters an apparition in the shape of a boat with oars, manned by Hudson's Bay employees, dressed in dark blue coats, shirts, and caps and red sashes. They always appear at the same end of the lake, and row across to the other end, where they talk with one another in French. Then they row back as they came, and disappear. If 4 men are seen in the boat, it is considered a good omen. But if 8 men, the reverse is the case, and the person seeing the apparition will become sick, or will die shortly afterward. This author has previously identified this body of water as Seton Lake, a lake of brilliant emerald hue near the town of Lillooet, BC, once traversed by Hudson's Bay Company employees, where monstrous fish have been reported, and which is said to never freeze in winter. A passage in anthropologist Wilson Duff's 1952 treatise on the Upper Stalo Indians indicates that Tate's nameless water mystery may actually be Wallich Lake, a small body of water in the North Cascade Mountains east of Chilliwack, and southwest of the town of Hope, BC, which was once known as Jones Lake. According to Duff's informants, up in the mountains, deep in the forests, and in certain bodies of water, lived all manner of strange unnatural creatures, which were called slalacooms. In former days, the sight of one of these powerful supernatural creatures was apt to cause soul sickness, unconsciousness, and an upset stomach. Certain places, usually bodies of water, were known to be the homes of slalacooms, or to have slalacoom properties of their own. Jones Lake was one. Strange men had been seen rowing there, then disappeared. Waterspouts and large waves were frequent, and sometimes the sound of beating hoofs was heard. Number 28. Caribou and Mishpicotton Islands. In Ontario waters near the eastern end of Lake Superior sit a pair of islands, both of which feature heavily in the legends of the Ojibwe, or Chippewa, and French-Canadian voyageurs. Mishpicotton Island, the larger and more northerly of the two, is located at the mouth of the Bay of Mishpicotton, a place which both whites and natives once regarded with superstitious awe. The bay, incidentally, is home to a cluster of tiny volcanic islands, which the local Ojibwe believed marked the final resting place of their legendary ancestor, Nanabozo, for whom they left gifts whenever they passed by, and its corresponding cape named by French-Canadian voyageurs after a giant which appears in French Renaissance literature. Mishpicotton Island itself was once known to the French as the Île Maurepas, named in honor of the one-time count of the French domain Maurepas, a military man and statesman named Jean-Frédéric Philippot. About 22 miles south of Mishpicotton Island, in the lake's latitudinal center just north of the Michigan border, lies the much smaller Caribou Island. Just off the northern point of this lonely isle lurks a dangerous reef called the 6 Fathom Shoal, which some theorists believe contributed to the infamous 1957 demise of the Great Lakes steamer, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. On account of this hazard, Caribou Island has played host to the Caribou Island Lighthouse and its various keepers since 1886. There is an old frontier legend which holds that one of these 2 islands was once home to a beach filled with gold dust or copper nuggets, which was guarded by an evil spirit which took the form of some sort of giant monster. This tale first appeared in volume 54 of the Jesuit Relations, a report written by French Jesuit Pierre Millet to his superiors describing his attempts to convert the Onondaga Iroquois of what is now upstate New York to Christianity from the years 1669 to 1671. Upon entering that great lake by its mouth, Millet wrote, referring to Lake Superior, where it empties into the Sioux, the first place where copper is found in abundance is an island opposite a spot called Mississippi-Cotong. The savages say that it is a floating island, which is sometimes far off, sometimes near, according to the winds that push it and drive it in all directions. They add that a long time ago, 4 savages came thither by chance, having lost their way in the fog by which that island is almost always surrounded. Hungry from their long journey, the natives decided to boil some meat in a birch bark basket, filling the basket with water and red-hot beach stones they had baked in a fire. While selecting these stones, Millet wrote, they found that they were almost all pieces of copper. When their meal was complete, the natives loaded their canoe with copper stones and prepared to disembark, but they had not gone far from the shore, Millet wrote, when a powerful voice made itself heard to their ears, calling in a great wrath, "Who are these robbers carrying off from me my children's cradles and playthings?" That voice astonished them greatly, as they knew not whose it was. Some say that it was the thunder, because there are many storms there, and others that it was a certain spirit, whom they call Misabizi, who passes among these people for the god of their waters, as Neptune did among the pagans. Others say it came from Mimico. These are, they say, marine people, from somewhat like the fabulous Tritons or the Sirens, who always live in the water, and have long hair reaching to the waist. One of our savages told us that he had seen one of them in the water, according to what he imagined. Rather than replace the copper, the terrified travelers paddled furiously for the mainland. Throughout the course of their journey, they began to mysteriously die one by one, until only one of the four remained. This sole survivor lived long enough to relate his disturbing account to some of his fellow tribesmen before following his companions to the grave. This story was alive and well in the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, appearing in the writings of Jonathan Carver, a captain in the Massachusetts colonial militia who spent the years 1766 to 1768 exploring the wilderness of what is now Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa in search of the fabled Northwest Passage. In his 1778 book, Travels Through the Interior Parts of North America, Carver wrote, "One of the Chippewa chiefs told me that some of their people, being once driven on the island of Maurepas, which lies towards the northeastern part of the lake, found on it large quantities of a heavy, shining yellow sand, that from their description must have been gold dust. Being struck with the beautiful appearance of it, in the morning, when they re-entered their canoe, they attempted to bring some away, but a spirit of amazing size, according to their account 60 feet in height, strode into the water after them, and commanded them to deliver back what they had taken away. Terrified at his gigantic stature, and seeing that he had nearly overtaken them, they were glad to restore their shining treasure, on which they were suffered to depart without further molestation. Since this incident, no Indian that has ever heard of it will venture near that same haunted coast. Besides this, they recounted to me many other stories of these islands, equally fabulous. A similar story was reiterated in the 1809 memoir of Alexander Henry the Elder, a contemporary of Carver's, born in the colony of New Jersey, and one of the first of the so-called peddlers, or independent Anglo-Celtic fur traders, to take over the old Great Lakes trading grounds of the French in the aftermath of the British conquest of Canada. Rather than adorning the rocky shores of the Île Maurepas, or Michipicoten Island, however, his informants told him that the beach with the golden sands, and their formidable guardian, lay on the more remote Caribou Island, which did not have an English name at the time. In his 1809 book, Travels and Adventures in Canada and the Indian Territories between the years 1760 to 1776, published in 1809, Henry described a prospecting expedition he undertook on Michipicoten Island in the spring of 1769, which yielded unsatisfactory results. "Disappointed in my expectations here," he wrote, "my curiosity was raised anew by the account given to me by my companions of another island, almost as large as that on which I was, and lying a little further to the southward. This they described as covered with a heavy yellow sand, which I was credulous enough to fancy must be gold. All they knew, however, of the island and its heavy yellow sand was from the report of some of their ancestors, concerning whom a tradition has come down to them, that being blown upon the former by a storm, they had escaped with difficulty from the enormous snakes by which it is inhabited, and which are the guardians of the yellow sand. I was eager to visit so remarkable a spot, and being told that in clear weather it was visible from the southward of the Île de Maurepas, I waited there 2 days, but the weather continuing hazy, I returned unsatisfied to my post." Henry managed to visit the island 2 years later, in the spring of 1771, when he and a business partner named Alexander Baxter headed there on a prospecting venture. Although Henry and Baxter did not find the golden sands, nor their fearsome denizens, they were hounded by a kettle of angry hawks, one of which snatched Henry's cap from his head. They also came upon a number of large caribou, for which the island was later named. Number 29. The Mimico Asylum. In southwestern Toronto, Ontario, near the northwestern shores of Lake Ontario, lies the lakeshore campus of a polytechnic school called Humber College. In stark contrast with the college's northwesterly North Campus, dominated by the modern-looking, glass-covered Learning Resource Commons. The Lakeshore campus is composed of a scattering of antiquated red brick buildings, referred to as cottages. Long before the first academic lectures were held within them in 1991, these elegant Victorian structures made up the Mimico Asylum, a psychiatric hospital established in 1889. Similar to the residents of the London Asylum, the inmates at Mimico were encouraged to spend time outside, engaged in physical labor like farming or construction work. Many of the red bricks of which the cottages are comprised were laid by the hands of patients. The Mimico cottages fell into disuse in 1979, when the hospital turned off its lights for the last time, and lay abandoned until 1991, when Humber College repurposed them as the lecture halls and libraries of its new Lakeshore campus. Although most of the old buildings are as lively and well kept today as they were in their Victorian heyday, there is one secret part of the campus on which the heavy hand of decay still rests. Hidden beneath the campus lawn is a network of underground tunnels built by the asylum inmates, which connects to nearly every building on the campus. Although this subterranean highway is usually off-limits to students and staff, visitors interested in exploring Humber College's underground world can do so legally by attending the Lakeshore Campus Tunnel Tour. Number 30. Shawinigan Falls. Another Quebecois cascade. These waterfalls lie on the St. Maurice River, about 20 miles upriver from the city of Trois-Rivières. At their feet lies a whirlpool, known as the Trou du Diable, or the Devil's Hole, not to be confused with the cave of the same name, which opens on the banks of the Sainte Anne River, 33 miles to the west. An old legend, said to predate the arrival of the French, contends that this infernal vortex is inhabited by a Manitou or demon, which imprisons all who fall into its clutches. One unfortunate supposed to have been sacrificed to the demon of Shawinigan Falls was a Jesuit missionary named Jacques Buteau. Shortly after his ordination in 1633, Buteau's superiors had sent him to Trois-Rivières, then a tiny habitation still in construction, freshly established by the great explorer Samuel de Champlain. The Jesuit would remain at the mission for 19 years, becoming its superior in 1639, at the escalation of a ferocious internative conflict referred today as the Beaver Wars. In 1651, following the Southerly Iroquois Confederacy's genocide of the Huron nations, for whose conversion to Catholicism the Jesuits of New France had concentrated their efforts, Jacques Buteau decided to travel north of the St. Maurice River for the purpose of finding new tribes to baptize. After returning from a successful expedition to northerly Kesagami Lake, located a mere 50 miles south of James Bay, Buteau made plans for another expedition, this one to Hudson Bay. On May 10, 1652, while undertaking this daunting expedition, the Jesuit and his native traveling companions were set upon by Iroquois warriors and killed. Legend has it that the Iroquois threw Buteau's corpse into the Trou du Diable at the foot of Shawinigan Falls as a sacrifice to the Manitou that dwelled there. Number 31. The Great Sandhills. In the southwestern corner of Saskatchewan, in the middle of Canada's 3 prairie provinces, lies a vast expanse of scrub and sand dunes, which would seem more at home in the Sahara or Gobi deserts than it does in the wilds of the Great White North. This bizarre-looking natural area, called the Great Sandhills, once served as the border separating the westerly Blackfoot Confederacy from its easterly rivals, the Plains Cree and Assiniboine. Up until the 20th century and beyond, many Blackfoot believed that the Great Sandhills was a thoroughly haunted area, teeming with Indian ghosts, who had taken up residence there after death. They went to great lengths to avoid traveling through the area in the daytime, and claimed that any unfortunate whom circumstance forced to camp there at night would very likely find himself caught in the crossfire of a skirmish between ghostly Blackfoot and Cree warriors, who spent the night thundering about on phantasmal horses in the darkness. This belief was so ubiquitous on the Canadian prairies that 19th century plainsmen commonly used the term the Sandhills as a euphemism for the afterlife in their writings, much as 20th century Hollywood Indian fighters did the Happy Hunting Grounds. Blackfoot and Plains Cree tradition cautions that anyone who ventures into the Great Sandhills at night runs the risk of being shot by a so-called night arrow, an invisible projectile fired from the bow of some ghostly warrior. The mysterious injuries produced by night arrows, interestingly, evoke a strange element of Newfoundland fairy folklore. According to Newfoundland legend, anyone foolish enough to wander into a swamp, a stretch of barrens, or any landscape infested with fairies is liable to be shot by an invisible projectile called a fairy blast. Those who suffer this indignity feel a sudden unaccountable pain in their arm or leg, which often renders the affected limb partially or fully crippled. At the epicenter of the pain is a swollen lump filled with a tangle of grass, feathers, twigs, and other natural miscellanea. Number 32. Lake Superior. The largest of North America's 5 Great Lakes, Lake Superior is home to more ghost stories and unsolved disappearances than any other body of water in Canada. Called Kichigami, or Big Lake, by the local Ojibwe, this freshwater sea has swallowed hundreds of ships over the past 4 centuries, including massive freighters like the SS Edmund Fitzgerald and the SS Kamloops, whose sunken skeleton serves as the final resting place of a chalk-white corpse, which is said to approach divers who visit the wreck. Its vast waters are a playground for ghost ships, like the shade of the SS Bannockburn, a steamer which vanished without a trace on a snowy November day in 1902. And its wooded shores are said to be haunted by the Wendigo, an evil spirit of Algonquin tradition, said to imbue its victims with an uncontrollable appetite for human flesh. In addition to nautical mysteries and native legends, Lake Superior is home to a handful of reputedly haunted lighthouses. Although most of Kichigami's ghostly beacons, like those at Crisp Point, Point Iroquois, Split Rock, and Stannard Rock, are located in the American states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, there are a few which line its northern shore. The St. Ignace Light, for example, located on tiny Talbot Island, south of St. Ignace Island, is said to be home to an evil spirit, which brings nothing but misfortune and death to its keepers. When its third and final keeper met a sticky end in 1872, the accursed lighthouse was abandoned, and ever since, sailors who pass by Talbot Island have reported seeing a woman with long white hair wandering along its rocky shore. Far to the east, the ghost of a former lighthouse keeper has been seen walking around the old keeper's house in lonely Slate Islands Provincial Park. Number 33. Spirit Island. One of the most iconic landmarks of Canada's Rocky Mountains, which has appeared in many a postcard, screensaver, and motivational poster, is Spirit Island, a tiny picturesque isle crowned with a coronet of spruce trees rising out of Jasper National Park's Moline Lake against a backdrop of pine forest and snow-capped mountains. As its name suggests, this enchanting islet is associated with a haunting ghost story, the origin of which has long been lost to history. According to a popular iteration of this tale, told to passengers of the Moline Lake boat cruise, which purports to be a stony Indian legend, the island was a secret meeting place of 2 star-crossed lovers, whose respective tribes were at war. When the girl's father learned of the illicit romance, he forbade her from returning to the island, and kept a strict watch over her to prevent her disobedience. Sick with grief, the girl fell ill and died. The Romeo of this Rocky Mountain tragedy, unaware of these developments, waited for his Juliet in the shade of the island's spruce boughs, and died there of a broken heart when it became clear that she would not return to him. Today, the spirit of the young man haunts the island, waiting in vain for his lost love. Number 34. Mesa Notre Dame de la Chênaie. I owe my knowledge of this abandoned asylum to a subscriber's comment. In the Quebec countryside southeast of Trois-Rivières, not far from the town of Saint-Clotilde-d'Auton, stands the Mesa Notre Dame de la Chênaie, an abandoned hospital with a gruesome history. The Maison began its life on an innocuous note in 1939, when members of a Catholic missionary congregation called the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart of Jesus constructed it for use as a monastery. In 1953, the monastery was sold to a Catholic educational organization called the Brothers of Christian Instruction, who converted it into a boys' school. On Christmas Day, 1959, 3 pupils shared a cigarette in a small confined corner of the school. In one version of the story, the students of La Maison passed around their illicit treat in a storage room far from the prying eyes of teachers. In another variation, the boys were locked together inside a closet as punishment for being in possession of tobacco, and lit up a cigarette inside in an effort to make the best of their incarceration. Whatever the case, the boys accidentally started a fire while smoking. Unable to escape in time, the 3 students burned to death. The school was closed in the wake of the tragedy and remained vacant until 1969, when the province of Quebec converted it into a home for the developmentally delayed. Legend has it that some of the treatments to which the asylum's inmates were subjected included lobotomies and torturous shock therapies. On the evening of January 23, 1988, one of the handicapped patients at La Maison stole a cigarette lighter from a staff member and set fire to a bed on the 4th floor. The toxic smoke which this fire generated choked 9 dormitory residents to death. The accursed building was abandoned in 2002 and has remained vacant ever since. In 2009, it was purchased by a Quebec couple, who initially intended to restore it as a seniors' home. When they failed to secure sufficient investment in their project, the asylum's new owners opened their derelict and heavily vandalized property to urban explorers, photographers, and paranormal investigators for the price of a small entry fee. Ever since, visitors to the abandoned asylum claim to have encountered the ghosts of several children in the halls of the decaying property and at the edge of the wood that surrounds it, while others have reported catching whiffs of phantom smoke while touring the asylum's dilapidated corridors. Number 35. Iroquois Falls. Located in the Canadian Shield about 34 miles northwest of Timmins, Ontario, this remote declivity of the Abitibi River is another cataract associated with a legend featuring Iroquois warriors. This story appears in the folklore of the Temiskaming Algonquin, Temagami Ojibwe, Swampy Cree, and Montagnais, and has many different versions. Every iteration is set in the late 1600s, in the twilight of the Beaver Wars, when the Iroquois Confederacy was warring with the Ojibwe in a campaign that would ultimately end their northern expansion. In this tale, an Iroquois war party headed north with the intention of fighting the Algonquin or Ojibwe Indians of Lake Abitibi. On the way, they came upon 1 or 2 of their enemies on the Abitibi River and captured them. In some versions of the story, the captive was an old woman, while in other versions, the prisoners were 2 men. Instead of executing them, the Iroquois told the prisoners to guide them to their village. The prisoners knew their country well, and were aware that the Abitibi River plunged over a roaring waterfall, roughly 30 miles upriver from the lake into which it drained. Muttering to each other in their own language, which the Iroquois did not understand, they decided not to tell their captors about the cataract. At a point just upriver from the precipice, the captors leapt from their canoes and swam for the shore. In another version of the story, they quietly remained in their vessels, sacrificing themselves for the survival of their tribe. By the time the Iroquois realized they had been deceived, their birch bark canoes were the thralls of the current. The entire war party tumbled over the brink, to be dashed to destruction on the rocks below. Ever after, the cataract was known as Iroquois Falls. Number 36. Devil's Lake. One of the creepiest Canadian locales I've ever read about is a small mountain pond called Devil's Lake, located in British Columbia's Stein Valley in the Katmuk Heritage Park in the Lillooet Mountains, west of the Fraser Canyon. According to Thompson Indian tradition, this remote mountain lake was a dangerous place, haunted by the spirit of an ancient evil medicine woman. Native legend has it that those who visit the area may see strange visions, such as logs floating across the lake with dogs running backward and forward on them, empty canoes drifting across the lake, and people made of ice who run along the shore, all of which vanish shortly after being seen. To see any of these things was considered a bad omen. Number 37. Tranquille Sanatorium. If you drive along the northern shores of Kamloops Lake, west of the city of Kamloops, British Columbia, into what this author considers some of the creepiest and simultaneously most beautiful country he's ever passed through, you'll drive by the Tranquille Peak and the gold-bearing Tranquille River. These geographical features were named after a sobriquet, which French-Canadian voyageurs gave to a calm, cool-headed 19th century Shuswap chief named Pacamoose, a friend of the ill-fated explorer Samuel Black. Another feature bearing the name of that well-loved Shuswap chief is the Tranquille sanatorium, an abandoned insane asylum just west of the Kamloops airport. Built in 1907 for the purpose of treating tuberculosis patients, the Tranquille sanatorium was converted into a mental institution in 1958. Like the asylums in London and Toronto, the sanatorium had a farm on site in which patients were encouraged to work, the surrounding soil being especially fertile. And like the Mimico asylum, its underground is crisscrossed by tunnels. The Tranquille sanatorium closed its doors in 1983 and remained abandoned for 35 years. In 2018, the site was purchased by a company called Tranquille Farm Fresh, which not only restored the asylum's farm to its former glory, but also established several tourist attractions, which take advantage of the abandoned building's spooky atmosphere. Today, visitors to the Tranquille sanatorium can take a guided tour through the dark tunnels beneath the asylum, or attempt to break themselves out of an escape room in the old infirmary itself. If they're lucky, they might have a run-in with one of the many spirits which local legend says haunt the grounds. Number 38. Lake Champlain. East of the Great Lakes, and south of the city of Montreal, Quebec, lies Lake Champlain, a long freshwater lake which Quebec shares with the states of New York and Vermont. The lake is named after Samuel de Champlain, a French explorer and colonist who founded the city of Quebec in 1608. In his 1613 memoir, Les Voyages de Sieur de Champlain, the so-called Father of New France described a strange fish in Lake Champlain, which the natives called chao farou, some of which allegedly reached a length of 10 feet. I saw some 5 feet long, he wrote in French, which were as large as my thigh, the head being as big as my 2 fists, with a snout 2.5 feet long, and a double row of very sharp and dangerous teeth. Its body is, in shape, much like that of a pike, but it is armed with scales so strong that a poniard could not pierce them. Its color is silver-gray. The extremity of its snout is like that of a swine. This fish makes war upon all others in the lakes and rivers. It also possesses remarkable dexterity, as the people informed me, which is exhibited in the following manner. When it wants to capture birds, it swims in among the rushes or reeds, which are found on the banks of the lake in several places, where it puts its snout out of the water and keeps perfectly still, so that when the birds come and light on its snout, supposing it to be only the stump of a tree, it adroitly closes it, which it had kept ajar, and pulls the bird by the feet down under the water. Today, most historians agree that the extraordinary fish to which Champlain referred was probably the bony-scaled pike or gar pike, which animals do occasionally eat ducks. Monstrous though they may be, gar pikes are not the only large and unusual fish believed to inhabit Lake Champlain. Since at least the early 1800s, visitors to the lake have reported seeing a huge serpent-like monster, which propels itself through the water by vertical undulation. Prior to the 1960s, the creature, now commonly referred to as champ, was usually described as having fiery eyes, glistening scales, a fish-like tail, and a proclivity to spout water. Reports from the 1960s, through the latter half of the 20th century, often describe champ as being dark or black in color, with a horse-like or snake-like head, with 2 horns or ears, and a mane. Over the years, several theories have been proposed as to the identity of the monster of Lake Champlain, the most popular contending that the animal is a hoax, a wave, a floating log, or a lake sturgeon. Others suspect that champ might be a rogue harbor seal, a relict plesiosaur, or a freshwater variety of an ancient species of whale called Basilosaurus. Whatever the case, sightings of champ continue to be made on Lake Champlain to this very day. Number 39. Sable Island. The next island on our list takes us to the Canadian Maritimes, to the waters off the province of Nova Scotia. Not to be confused with Cape Sable Island, another mysterious Nova Scotian island, characterized by folklorist Helen Creighton in her 1957 classic, Blue Nose Ghosts, as a hotspot for ghosts, banshees, and mysterious omens known locally as forerunners. Sable Island is a narrow crescent-shaped strip of land and grass located deep within the North Atlantic Ocean, about 100 miles from the mainland. Often referred to as the graveyard of the Atlantic, this remote island is estimated to have brought about the destruction of over 350 ships, whose unfortunate captains ran their vessels aground its sandy shores. These shipwrecks are believed to account, to a small degree, for the island's famous population of wild horses, and for the many ghost stories to which the island is home. Sable Island's most famous ghost story, immortalized by Nova Scotian historian Thomas Chandler Halliburton in his 1853 book, The Sam Slick Anthology, involves the apparition of a 9-fingered lady, supposed to be the tortured spirit of one of the island's many shipwreck victims. The historic origins of this folktale are as hazy as the sea spray, some storytellers connecting it with a ship called the Princess Amelia, which fell prey to the island in 1802, and others, Halliburton included, with a more famous vessel called Francis, which foundered off the island in the year 1800. Whatever the case, the only survivor of this wreck was a lady named Copeland, who had managed to struggle ashore clinging to a hatch cover. Legend has it that Copeland's pitiful figure attracted the attention of a notorious wrecker who lived on the island, who made his living scrounging valuable shipwreck debris that so frequently washed ashore. The scavenger waded out to the lady, dragged her ashore by the hair, and murdered her on the beach, hoping to acquire a valuable emerald or diamond ring she wore. When the ring proved impossible to remove the conventional way on account of the woman's waterlogged skin, the scavenger hacked off the corpse's ring finger. Ever since, the ghost of Lady Copeland appears from time to time standing on the spot where she was murdered, waving aloft a bloody hand with the ring finger missing. Other ghosts said to haunt Sable Island include the spirit of a coxswain, said to have drowned near the island's East End lighthouse, and one of the victims of a short-lived French penal colony established on the island in 1598. The latter was founded by a Breton nobleman named Toileau de Mécouet, Marquis de la Roche-Elguemarche, the second viceroy of New France after Jean-François Roberval, who peopled his little island colony with hardened criminals and sturdy vagabonds swept from the prisons and gutters of Rouen. In 1602, after La Roche failed to deliver an annual shipment of wine and clothing to his men on Sable Island, the little colony descended into anarchy. When the viceroy finally sailed to that lonely, windswept isle in 1603, he learned that a handful of malcontents had instigated a mutiny, which resulted in the murder of the colony's 2 leaders and several of their supporters. Having broken the thin seal of restraint that kept their criminal inclinations in check, the colonists gave vent to the interpersonal grudges which had festered throughout their 6-year incarceration, stealing from and murdering their fellow islanders without reserve. According to a popular rendition of this historic event, which this author has been unable to verify, only 11 colonists remained alive at the time of La Roche's disembarkation, the remainder having either succumbed to starvation or been murdered and possibly cannibalized. According to legend, La Roche took aboard every colonist but a pious Franciscan friar, who elected to remain behind on account of failing health. To this very day, the shade of this cowled, brown-robed priest is said to walk the dunes of Sable Island, scanning the waves for shipwreck survivors in need of assistance. Number 40. The Riverview Hospital. The next asylum on our list is one of the most filmed buildings in Western Canada. Built in 1904 atop an old Stalo Indian burial ground on the outskirts of Coquitlam, British Columbia, the Riverview Hospital was initially employed as an asylum for the mentally ill. It quickly developed a reputation as the home of the province's most dangerous mental patients, housing psychopaths, sociopaths, and the criminally insane. Like other Canadian asylums, the Riverview Hospital boasted a patient-run farm, which allowed it to be semi-self-sufficient. Like the Charles Camsell, many of its inmates were subjected to forced sterilization, electroshock therapy, and other treatments now regarded as unethical. The hospital grew in size throughout the 20th century, reaching its zenith in the mid-1950s. In the late 1960s, it began to gradually downsize, which trend continued until its closure. Beginning in the 1980s, when Hollywood began turning to the greater Vancouver area, so-called Hollywood North, for filming locations. The Riverview Hospital appeared in several major movies and TV shows, including The X-Files, Riverdale, Supernatural, and Deadpool. Today, it is estimated that nearly 200 cinematic projects utilize the hospital as a filming location. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, the hospital's downsizing increased dramatically, prompted by overcrowding. In 2012, the Riverview Hospital closed its doors for good, essentially turning its patients out onto the streets of Vancouver. Today, the abandoned building is guarded by professional security personnel, accessible only to pre-authorized film crews and participants in infrequently scheduled tours. Number 41. Strathcona Provincial Park. In the very heart of British Columbia's Vancouver Island lies Strathcona Provincial Park, the oldest of its kind in the province, and the largest of its kind on the island. Among the most famous sections of this sprawling stretch of wilderness is an area with a sinister-sounding appellation, the Forbidden Plateau. According to popular legend, a band of Comox Indian warriors once hid their women and young children on the plateau during a raid on their village by Cowichan warriors. After successfully driving the raiders back, the Comox returned to the plateau to find that their women and children had disappeared. In their place was a carpet of blood-red lichen that hadn't been there before. Fearing that their loved ones had been taken by an evil spirit, the Comox left the area, agreeing that they ought never to return to that haunted plateau, lest they arouse the anger of its dangerous preternatural inhabitant. Although the legend of the Forbidden Plateau is almost certainly a fabrication, invented in the 1920s for the purpose of attracting tourism to the area, Strathcona Provincial Park remains an unusual area in which strange things have occurred. In 1946, the Forbidden Plateau was the epicenter of the strongest earthquake to ever rip through Canadian soil, which caused considerable damage in the easterly city of Vancouver. In 1988, the late Canadian wildlife biologist John Bindernagel discovered what he believed to be Sasquatch footprints in Strathcona Provincial Park, and heard mysterious whooping sounds, which he believed to be Sasquatch vocalizations at neighboring Comox Lake in 1992. And throughout the 1990s and 2000s, an alarming number of hikers vanished without a trace in Strathcona Provincial Park. Number 42. The Doria Institute. Asylum is a bit of a misnomer for the next institution on our list. The abandoned Doria Institute in the village of Franklin, Quebec, located a mere 600 feet from the US border south of the city of Montreal, has its shadowy origins in a dark chapter of Canadian history. In the 1940s, Quebec was a poor province whose asylums and orphanages were chronically understaffed and underfunded, run by Roman Catholic religious orders. At that time, Canada's federal government subsidized provincial social services, granting institutions $1.25 a day for every orphan under their care, and $2.75 for every psychiatric patient they housed. In a misguided effort to double the funding for his province's financially starved orphanages, Quebec's premier, Maurice Duplessis, apparently with the cooperation of the College of Physicians of Quebec and various religious orders, converted a handful of orphanages into insane asylums, and had thousands of orphans and illegitimate children misdiagnosed as mentally ill. In a tragic twist, instead of improving the lots of the so-called Duplessis orphans affected by this deception, as appears to have been its aim, Duplessis' scheme inexplicably resulted in perfectly healthy children being treated as though they were actually mentally ill, through which process they developed lifelong physical and emotional injuries. According to survivors of the Duplessis orphanages, children at certain Quebec institutions were routinely subjected to electric shock treatments, forced into straitjackets, locked in isolation cells for hours at a time, and administered a variety of mind-altering drugs. The impact of such treatment proved to be profound. Duplessis orphans grew up to develop debilitating mental illnesses at a demonstrably higher level than their non-institutionalized lower-class peers. It was out of this maelstrom that the Doria Institute, an insane asylum for orphans and illegitimate children, was born. Although this author was unable to find much reliable English-language information on the history of this asylum, it seems reasonable to assume that the young, parentless inmates of the Doria Institute, which was abandoned to the Quebec forest in 1995, suffered a similar fate to that of other Duplessis orphans. If the reports of ghost hunters are to be believed, the psychic scars left by the asylum's former inmates could, until recently, be felt in the building's decrepit gymnasium and rotting dormitories, where shadowy apparitions could be seen, and phantom shrieks heard. Less than a month ago, in November 2022, the main building of the Doria Institute was demolished, perhaps affording the restless souls trapped within its moldering walls the peace that was so unjustly denied them in life. Number 43. Okanagan Lake. We return to the province of British Columbia, to the home of Champ's legendary cousin, the Ogopogo. In south-central British Columbia, at the eastern edge of the interior plateau, lies a long, narrow lake of remarkable depth. Before American explorers in the service of the Pacific Fur Company first set foot on its shores in 1811, local Okanagan Indians told stories about a powerful and dangerous spirit that lived in this Okanagan Lake, which conjured rough waters and strong winds whenever it was displeased. Beginning in the late 1800s, white pioneers began to have their own encounters with the lake's legendary inmate, which they described as a giant black serpent with a sheep-like head, with or without two tall horns, which moved by vertical undulation. As reports of the creature continued to be made throughout the 20th century, the monster of Okanagan Lake was given the name Ogopogo. Sightings of the Ogopogo are still made with casual frequency today. As recently as mid-October 2022, Okanagan residents Dale and Colleen Hanchar and their friend Myrna Germaine Brown saw something unusual in Okanagan Lake while boating. Concerned that the mysterious object might pose a hazard for fellow boaters, Dale snapped a photo of it, noted its location, and returned to shore with the intention of alerting the relevant authorities. Upon examining the photo more closely, Dale found that the mysterious subject resembled a dragon-like head, with two tall horns, very much evoking the legendary Ogopogo. Canada's Global News, which broke the story, concluded its piece with an analysis by Wisconsin-based cryptozoologist Adam Benedict, founder of the Pine Barrens Institute. Benedict, whom this author can only assume has never seen a duck in his life, proposed that the image which Hanchar captured was really a water bird in the process of diving. Water bird or not, the Ogopogo is not the only unusual creature said to haunt Okanagan Lake. Both Okanagan Indian tradition and classic Bigfoot books are filled with stories about giants and hairy wildmen, which haunt the hills and mountains beyond Okanagan Lake. Number 44. The Weyburn Mental Hospital. Located in an unassuming corner of the Canadian prairies, this next asylum has a shocking and unexpected connection to one of the darkest elements of modern geopolitics. On December 29, 1921, the doors to Canada's newest insane asylum were opened in a remote area in southeastern Saskatchewan. Located on the outskirts of the city of Weyburn, not far from the Surrey River, the Weyburn Mental Hospital was a sprawling brick complex designed expressly for the purpose of housing the mentally ill. This early example of so-called socio-architecture was dominated by a 4-story center block, from which branched 3 triple-story wings, complete with wide corridors, large dormitories, and numerous verandas. As was the case with many other Canadian asylums, patients at the Weyburn Mental Hospital spent most of their time working outdoors on the hospital farm, or performing domestic chores inside. This unpaid labor was believed to improve the patient's mental states by providing exercise and a sense of accomplishment, and had the added benefit of reducing hospital expenses. Besides the simple therapy of manual work, inmates were subjected to a variety of cruel treatments typical of 20th century asylums, including lobotomies, in which the prefrontal cortex of a patient's brain is surgically removed, insulin shock therapy, in which patients were put into medically induced comas through the administration of large doses of insulin, hydrotherapy, in which patients were plunged into baths of freezing water, and electroconvulsive therapy, in which patients were put into electrically induced seizures. several physicians recognized for their pioneering work in the field of biological psychiatry have walked the halls of the Weyburn Mental Hospital. Among their number were biochemist Abram Hoffer, author of the controversial theory that schizophrenia is caused by the inability to metabolize adrenochrome in the brain, and can be cured through the administration of megadoses of vitamin B3, and neuroscientist John Raymond Smithies, the champion of a similar hypothesis, which contends that schizophrenia is caused by an inability to metabolize the neurotransmitter catecholamine. Of all the doctors to darken the asylum's doors, among the most interesting was an English-born psychiatrist named Humphrey Fortescue Osmond, a pioneer in the medical application of psychoactive drugs, who joined the staff of the Weyburn Mental Hospital in 1951. Along with Dr. Hoffer, Humphrey Osmond experimented on alcoholics in his care by administering them high doses of the psychedelic drug LSD, hoping that the experience might stimulate delirium tremens, or severe alcohol withdrawal, the latter being an extremely unpleasant and dangerous experience, which often compelled alcoholics to give up the bottle. This exploratory treatment yielded surprisingly positive results, with an astonishing 50% of its human guinea pigs subsequently recovering from their addiction. Similar to his colleagues, Drs. Hoffer and Smithies, he developed a theory that schizophrenia is caused by self-intoxication, resultant of the inability to metabolize adrenaline, noting the molecular similarity between adrenaline and the hallucinogenic drug mescaline. Osmond's work attracted the attention of English writer Aldous Huxley, author of the 1932 dystopian novel Brave New World, whose chilling philosophies regarding the merits of a scientific dictatorship and the dangers of global overpopulation seem to have been adopted by many influential members of today's Western elite. In 1953, Huxley tripped on mescaline that Osmond brought to his home in the Hollywood Hills under the doctor's supervision. His experience prompted him to write his famous essay, The Doors of Perception, in which he extolled the virtues of hallucinogenic drugs. And in a 1956 letter to Huxley, written in the Weyburn Mental Hospital, Osmond coined the word psychedelic, writing it for the first time in the following couplet. To fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic. Osmond's work also drew the interest of America's Central Intelligence Agency, which hoped to use psychedelic drugs as brainwashing tools, and as truth serums by which to extract honest confessions during interrogations. With the help of information they gleaned from Dr. Osmond, the CIA initiated Project MK-Ultra, an illicit, top-secret human experimentation program in which the administration of psychoactive drugs and other mind control techniques were tested on unsuspecting subjects. In 1971, the asylum's 3 wings were closed off, with only the center block remaining in operation. And in 2004, the Weyburn Mental Hospital closed its doors for good. The abandoned brick building fell into rapid decay and was demolished throughout the summer and fall of 2009. Today, a desolate grassy field at the western edge of town is all that remains of the once imposing asylum. Number 45, Kakabeka Falls. Located on the Kaministiquia River just 30 kilometers or 19 miles west of Thunder Bay, Ontario, this so-called Niagara of the North is connected with an old native legend bearing a remarkable resemblance to the tale of Iroquois Falls. Set in the 18th or 19th century, when the Ojibwe were at war with the southerly Sioux, this tale tells of an Ojibwe princess named Green Mantle, who learned that a massive Sioux war party was on its way to attack the camp of her father, identified in some versions of the story as Chief White Bear, and in others as Ogama Eagle. Knowing that the invaders would wipe out her father's village, the girl decided to sacrifice herself for the sake of her kin. One night, Green Mantle slipped away from her village on Lake Superior and headed up the Kaministiquia River, from which the Sioux were supposed to arrive. After portaging around the waterfall, she came within sight of the Sioux camp and pretended to be unaware of its presence. She was soon perceived by a scout and captured. Although the invaders initially intended to execute her, Green Mantle begged for her life, promising to take the braves to her village if they spared her. The warriors agreed and placed the girl in a canoe at the head of their convoy before proceeding downriver. Like the old woman in the tale of Iroquois Falls, Green Mantle led her captors to the edge of Kakabeka Falls, by which time escape was impossible. Recognizing that their fate was sealed, the Sioux warriors sang their death songs as they followed the girl over the precipice and vanished into the spray below. Ever since, the legend says, Greenmantle's slender figure, resplendent in rainbow hues, can sometimes be seen floating in the mists that enshroud Kakabeka Falls, while the faint death wails of the Sioux rise up from the waters below. Number 46. Southampton Island. At the northern end of Hudson Bay, in what is now the territory of Nunavut, lies a large triangular piece of land called Southampton Island. This barren Arctic isle was the site of a strange adventure set down in the journal of Captain Luke Fox, a 17th century English adventurer who sailed the frigid waters of northern Canada in search of the Northwest Passage. Fox set out on his first and only Arctic expedition in the spring of 1631. Sailing from Kirkwall, Orkney, he and his crew headed west across the Atlantic to Frobisher Bay, near the northern lip of Hudson Bay. The Englishman sailed through the Hudson Strait, and, after visiting the crew of Welsh Captain Thomas James, who was similarly searching for the fabled water route to the Orient, headed west. On July 27, 1631, Captain Fox and his crew disembarked at Southampton Island, where they stumbled upon a peculiar above-ground cemetery, consisting of a number of tiny coffins made from wood and stone, which contained equally tiny corpses. Fox described this startling discovery in his journal, writing, "The news from land was that this island was a sepulchre, for the savages had laid their dead, I cannot say interred, for it is all stone, as they cannot dig therein, but lay the corpses on the stones, and wall them about with the same, coffining them also by laying the sides of old sleds about, which have been artificially made. The boards are some 9 or 10 foot long, 4 inches thick. In what manner the tree they have been made out of was cloven or sawn, it was too smooth that we could not discern, the burials had been so old. The longest corpses was not above 4 foot long, 2 with the heads laid to the west. It may be that they travel, as the Tartars and Samoyeds, for if they had remained here, there would have been some newer burials. There was one place walled 4 square, and seated within the earth. Each side was 4 or 5 yards in length. In the middle was 3 stones, laid one above another, man's height. We took this to be some place of ceremony at the burial of the dead." In a footnote, Fox added, "They seem to be people of small stature. God send me better for my adventures than these." Eerily, the tiny corpses discovered by Fox and his crew accord perfectly with an old Inuit tradition, which holds that the islands of the Arctic archipelago are the domain of little elf-like men with preternatural abilities, specimens of which have been reported throughout the years by trappers, prospectors, outdoor adventurers, and northern natives. Number 47. The St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital. Born on the brink of World War II, the St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital spent most of its infancy under the appropriation of the Royal Canadian Air Force, which employed it as a technical training school. By the time the war was over, nearly 50,000 RCAF personnel had been trained within its walls. The limestone complex resumed its original function in November 1945, housing up to 2,300 patients with mental illnesses from across Ontario. Like many of its Canadian contemporaries, the asylum had a patient-run farm, which supplied the inmates with fresh meat, milk, and vegetables. From 1976 to 1988, patients at the St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital were allegedly subjected to what has been described as an abusive and punitive patient-run program with no medical merit, supposedly conducted with the knowledge and tacit consent of the Ontario provincial government. In what has been described as one of the most bizarre chapters in the annals of Canadian psychiatric history, a twisted parallel of the patient-run farm concept, psychotic male inmates from another Ontario asylum called Oak Ridge were supposedly brought to St. Thomas and placed in charge of the control, treatment, and punishment of female patients. Oak Ridge, it must be mentioned, has a horrific history of its own. A wing of the Waypoint Centre for Mental Health Care, located on the southern shores of Lake Huron's Georgian Bay, this all-male asylum was dedicated to the treatment of the criminally insane. Its inmates included some of Ontario's most dangerous offenders, including serial killers and mafia hitmen. In what has been called the Oak Ridge Experiment, inmates of the Georgian Bay Asylum were subjected to cruel and unusual punishments like sleep deprivation, long periods of sensory deprivation, physical torture, and treatment with LSD, which were intended to break them down emotionally so that they could be rebuilt as higher-functioning members of society. Graduates of this horrific program were selected to preside over the treatment of St. Thomas's female inmates. As might be expected, the scheme backfired horribly. Throughout the 6-year period in which the program was in place, inmates from the Oak Ridge Institution are said to have systematically abused the female patients under their care. Alleged victims of the St. Thomas experiment are currently in the process of seeking legal redress for the indignities they claim to have suffered when inmates really ran the asylum. The St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital closed its doors in 2013 and has laid derelict ever since. Although the abandoned asylum has been a popular destination for urban explorers ever since, the Ontario Provincial Police have issued a warning that trespassers caught on the property will be ticketed. Number 48. Massacre. At the southeastern end of Vancouver Island, just north of the city of Duncan, stands Massacre, the site of a bygone ghost town called Lenora and a long-abandoned copper mine. Many visitors to the area have reported seeing the apparition of a headless woman in a white nightgown, walking across a logging road near the old Lenora town site, or across nearby Massacre Road. Legend has it that this phantom is the ghost of a miner's wife, whose husband murdered her for suspected infidelity. In an effort to conceal his crime, he dismembered her corpse and buried it on the mountainside. On November 29, 1980, at the height of a terrific storm, a brilliant but eccentric mechanic named Granger Taylor vanished from the city of Duncan, British Columbia, just south of Massacre. In the weeks preceding his disappearance, Taylor informed his closest friends that he had been contacted by extraterrestrials, who promised to pick him up in a flying saucer and take him on a tour of the Milky Way galaxy. He wrote the same in a letter he left for his parents, declaring that he would return from his interstellar voyage in 42 months. In April 1986, 6 years after Taylor's disappearance, a municipal works crew discovered a large artificial crater on the slopes of Massacre, which contained scattered scraps of vehicular debris and human bone. The debris was suspected to be the remains of Taylor's car, and the bone fragments the remains of Taylor himself, suggesting the possibility that the eccentric mechanic may have used dynamite to destroy himself and his car on the spot. Whatever Taylor's true fate, it is interesting to note that a number of spectacular UFO sightings have been reported in the neighboring Cowichan Valley. No creepy locale on Vancouver Island would be complete without a Sasquatch sighting, and Massacre is no exception. Sometime in the late 2010s, a local named Andrew DeWall claimed to have encountered a Sasquatch while driving his Jeep with a friend on a logging road on Massacre. DeWall threw rocks at the creature, which screamed at him in return. Number 49. Courtney Lake. About an hour and a half west of Okanagan Lake, not far from the city of Merritt, BC, lies a much smaller body of water called Courtney Lake. In September 2021, this author was contacted by a man from Quesnel, British Columbia, who claimed to have experienced something unusual at Courtney Lake in the 1970s when he was a teenager, when he lived with his family in Merritt. While camping in an old abandoned bunkhouse on the lake's shore, my informant and his teenage friends found themselves suddenly surrounded by a herd of cattle, driven by rugged-looking cowboys clad in old-fashioned clothing popular in the late 1800s. One of the cowboys was clearly astonished to see the teenagers, and after getting control of his horse, which seemed to be in a state of panic, he dismounted and walked towards them. Afraid that they might be penalized for trespassing, the teenagers abandoned the bunkhouse and fled down a nearby hill. When they finally looked back to see whether they were being pursued, they found the valley quiet and empty, despite that a huge herd of cattle had occupied it mere moments before. My informant suspects that he and his friends had encountered a portal in time, some sort of rift in the temporal dimension, which opens infrequently to allow temporary congress between people and objects from different time periods. He also suspects that this phenomenon might have some bearing on the alarming number of men and women who have disappeared from British Columbia's interior plateau without a trace. Number 50. Bird Rock. Every day, freighters passing through the Cabot Strait, between Newfoundland and Nova Scotia's Cape Breton Island, float by a bleak, windswept isle known as Rocher-aux-Oiseaux, or Bird Rock. This 5-acre islet is an outlying member of the Magdalen Islands, a hook-shaped archipelago in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which, despite being closer to Canada's maritime provinces, actually belongs to the province of Quebec. In the summer, Bird Rock is a birdwatcher's paradise, nearly every nook and cranny of its red sandstone cliffs being occupied by some variety of migratory seabird, from petrels to gulls to razor-billed auks. Every autumn, Bird Rock's eponymous denizens migrate south to warmer climes, leaving Rocher-aux-Oiseaux silent and desolate. In this gloomier state, Bird Rock seems more accordant with its morbid history and the shroud of superstition that surrounds it. For atop the grassy plateau of Rocher-aux-Oiseaux, so say the folk of the Magdalen Islands, dwells a terrible curse. Since the earliest years of New France, Bird Rock and the rest of the Magdalens posed a deadly hazard to the crews of European sailing ships entering the Gulf of St. Lawrence from the Atlantic Ocean. Vessels sailing through the Strait of Cabot at night, or in heavy fog, ran the risk of smashing to matchwood against their cliffs, and throughout the centuries, hundreds of ships met their ends in this manner. In order to prevent disasters such as these, Canada's Department of Public Works built a lighthouse on Bird Rock, and hired a Frenchman named Jacques Guillet as its first keeper. According to legend, Guillet went mad after 2 years of solitude on Bird Rock, and had to be removed from the island in a straitjacket. Before being hauled away to an asylum, Guillet is said to have uttered the following prophecy: "No man will keep this lighthouse for more than 10 years without meeting misfortune." Incredibly, in the decades following Guillet's brief tenure, a staggering number of lighthouse keepers met with tragedy and disaster on Bird Rock. In April 1880, keeper Paul Whelan and his son froze to death while hunting seals on sea ice near the island. In the summer of 1881, Whelan's successor, Charles Chiasson, accidentally ignited a gunpowder barrel while firing the lighthouse's fog cannon, killing himself and his son. Chiasson's successor, Telesphore Turbide, blew his hand off while firing the fog cannon in 1891, and had his legs crushed by a crane in 1896 during a routine supply shipment. Telesphore's cousin, Orson Turbide, died with his son and assistant keeper while taking a break from his keeper duties to hunt for seals. Keeper Wilfred Burke died mysteriously while hunting seals near the island. Wilfred's nephew and successor, Alphonse Burke, brought a cow to the island, which jumped over a cliff into the sea after only 6 weeks, apparently having been driven mad by the birds. And Alphonse's brother, Albin, while tending the lighthouse in his brother's stead, died after drinking water that had apparently been contaminated by bird droppings. After an uneventful 15-year tenure by keeper J. Montague Arsenault, Bird Rock never again subjected its residents to another catastrophe. In 1967, the lighthouse was replaced by a new 31-foot hexagonal concrete tower, and in 1988, the tower was automated, leaving Bird Rock for the birds. Today, the lighthouse of Rocher-aux-Oiseaux operates on its own, as if manned by ghostly keepers. Its eerie desolation serves as a chilling reminder of the deadly curse which haunted its inhabitants for more than half a century. Number 51. The Whitby Psychiatric Hospital. Once located on the northwestern shores of Lake Ontario, just southwest of the city of Oshawa, the Whitby Psychiatric Hospital was built in 1914, at the advent of World War I. In a situation similar to that of the St. Thomas Hospital, the asylum at Whitby was taken over by the Canadian government and used as a convalescent hospital for Canadian soldiers wounded on the battlefields of Europe. The hospital resumed its function as an insane asylum in 1919, and was for many years regarded as a shining example of what a Canadian mental institution could be with proper management. Like the Mimico Asylum, this institution boasted 16 cottages, many of which, by the 1980s, had lapsed into a state of decay. As the cottages had been insulated with asbestos, the dust from which is carcinogenic, many were condemned and boarded up throughout the latter years of the 20th century. In the 1990s, the abandoned cottages of the Whitby Psychiatric Hospital became a popular hangout spot for teenagers, who explored the rotting structures and the asbestos-ridden steam tunnels beneath them, in the hope of encountering one of the ghosts said to haunt the site. In 2003, the old hospital enjoyed one last moment in the spotlight, when the Canadian rock band Billy Talent used it as a set for the music video for their debut single, Try Honesty. 2 years later, the abandoned cottages were demolished, sending the Whitby Psychiatric Hospital into the cultural oblivion that is the lot of all vanished buildings. Number 52. Manitou Falls. The most remote waterfall on our list, this lonely cascade was located in northwestern Ontario, on the English River about 70 kilometers northeast of Kenora, and was destroyed when the Manitou generating station was built over it in 1956. According to Nipigon Ojibwe writer Josie Cormier, who learned the tale from her grandmother, those who encamped near the falls at night would often hear the sobs and wails of a woman issuing from the cascade. Similar to the visions reported at Kakabeka Falls, visitors to this cataract sometimes caught glimpses of a feminine figure peering out of the rushing water. They used to see a picture, Cormier's grandmother said, like a shadow of a woman in the falls, in the mist, and she was crying, and they never knew why. Number 53. Shelburne Island. For centuries, the western shores of the island of Newfoundland was a dark, desolate terra incognita, devoid of any semblance of permanent settlement. The perfect place for pirates, smugglers, and thieves to hide ill-gotten loot. One of this region's most famous lost treasure stories is set on a small 8, or river isle, known as Shelburne Island, located on the Humber River not far from its mouth in the Bay of Islands. This isle is overlooked by a 40-foot-tall cliff bearing a snarl of crags resembling the weathered countenance of an old bearded sailor, a natural landmark which locals fondly refer to as the Old Man in the Mountain. Legend has it that the Old Man in the Mountain is privy to a centuries-old secret, namely the location of a treasure which lies buried on Shelburne Island. There are a number of different stories which purport to explain the origin of this mysterious treasure. One involves a Spanish galleon laden with Peruvian silver and Inca gold, which foundered off the coast of Newfoundland during a storm. Another revolves around Eric Cobham and Maria Lindsay, a semi-mythical 18th century maritime Bonnie and Clyde who are said to have preyed on French merchant ships. But the most popular tale, first told many years ago by an ancient Nova Scotian sailor to a resident of the Bay of Islands, features a notorious arch-pirate of the Atlantic by the name of Peter Easton, who once operated out of Harbour Grace, Newfoundland, and whom many historians regard as the most materially successful pirate to ever sail the high seas. According to legend, one variety of seagoing vessels that Peter Easton and his crew preyed upon while headquartered at Harbour Grace were fur-bearing French merchant ships fresh from the ports of Quebec and Montreal. During one such plundering operation, Easton and his men were spotted by a massive French man-of-war. Painfully cognizant of the superior firepower of the French warship, the pirate and his crew fled north to Newfoundland. In an effort to evade the larger vessel, which dogged their wake, the pirates sailed up Newfoundland's west coast, into the Bay of Islands, and further up the Humber River. In the hold of Easton's ships were 3 chests filled with gold, the spoils of a previous raid. Loath to allow the treasures to fall into the hands of the French, Easton ordered his first mate to bury it in a safe location nearby. Accompanied by another pirate, the first mate headed further up the Humber in a smaller rowboat, with 3 chests and a pair of shovels. Several miles upriver, the first mate spotted the Old Man in the Mountain, the face of an aged sailor, which God had graven into the cliffside. Hoping to use the landmark as a marker, the mate decided to bury the treasure on what is now Shelburne Island, the river isle upon which the Old Man gazed. With the help of his companion, he began digging 3 different pits on the island, into which the treasure chests were to be interred. In those days, the legend says, it was customary for pirates to bury a fresh corpse along with their loot, so that the spirit of the dead man might guard the treasure until their return. In accordance with this custom, the first mate waited until all 3 holes were dug, before drawing his flintlock pistol and dispatching his hapless companion. That accomplished, the mate proceeded to bury the 3 chests, one of them with the dead man, and conceal the locations of the deposits before getting back into his boat and rowing downstream. As fate would have it, the first mate never made it back to the ship. At a particularly turbulent section of the Humber River, known as the Devil's Dancing Pool, he capsized his rowboat and drowned, taking the secret of the treasure's location with him to his watery grave. Legend has it that Shelburne Island has yielded 2 of her 3 treasure chests. One was purportedly discovered by a group of treasure hunters in the late 1800s, her contents shared in secret. Another was supposedly dug up around 1934. As for the third chest, local lore maintains that it still lies somewhere beneath Shelburne Island, promising untold riches to any treasure hunter determined enough to find it, and brave enough to defy the ghost of the pirate who guards it. Number 54. The Fort Qu'Appelle Sanatorium. This last hospital on our list is not an asylum, although its story closely parallels many of the institutions we have explored in this piece. Constructed from 1913 to 1917, in the picturesque coulee of Echo Lake, not far from the town of Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan, the Fort Qu'Appelle Sanatorium, also known as Fort San, was established for the purpose of treating tuberculosis patients. It continued to serve this function throughout the first half of the 20th century. Highlights in its history including the establishment of an on-site library by veterans of the Great War in 1918, and the 1919 construction of a children's pavilion. Like other Canadian mental institutions, it had its own farm, which allowed it some self-sufficiency. In 1967, when the White Plague was no longer a major threat in Canada, the Tudor Revival-style tuberculosis hospital was converted into the Saskatchewan Summer School of the Arts, at which children and teenagers from across the province took lessons in dance, music, theater, writing, and visual art. In the early 1990s, it was converted again into the Echo Valley Conference Center. In 2004, the old sanatorium was abandoned, visited only by photographers, urban explorers, and paranormal investigators. According to local legend, the abandoned building was one of the most haunted places in Saskatchewan. Some of the spirits said to roam its rotting halls included a singing lady, whom a young music camp attendee is said to have encountered in the men's bathroom, and an orderly known as Nurse Jane, an alleged murderess and suicide, whose shade is said to have been seen folding linens and pushing wheelchairs. In 2017, despite local protests, the Fort Qu'Appelle Sanatorium was demolished, undergoing what is the inevitable fate of all abandoned hospitals in Canada. Number 55. Albion Falls. This final addition to our list brings us back to southern Ontario, to a section of Red Hill Creek roughly 40 miles west of Niagara Falls. Located in Kings Forest Park in Hamilton, Ontario, a city boasting over 100 waterfalls, this aquatic curtain draped over the Niagara Escarpment is the setting of a haunting urban legend. In either 1865 or 1915, depending on who was telling the story, a poor young woman named Jane Riley fell in love with her childhood friend, Joseph Rousseau, the son of a wealthy family. Joseph courted Jane for some time, contrary to the wishes of his mother, who despised the girl for her poverty. The star-crossed couple spent a single blissful summer together, making some of their happiest memories at their favorite picnic spot atop Albion Falls. In the end, maternal pressure conquered natural affection, and Joseph found himself compelled to release Jane and cast his amorous net in waters more befitting his social station. Utterly devastated, the jilted girl is said to have spent her final days wandering through the woods at the edge of town, her eyes swollen and her hair unkempt, melting into a paroxysm of sobs whenever a passerby offered a helping hand. One cold autumn day, Jane is said to have climbed to the top of Albion Falls, held the skirt of her dress tight to her legs, and flung herself from the promontory's heights. Her broken body was found by laborers at the base of the cliff. Legend has it that Jane's spirit returned to haunt the mother of Joseph Rousseau, and may have frightened her to death. Some say that Jane's ghost still appears from time to time, standing atop Albion Falls on moonlit nights, or that soft weeping can sometimes be heard in the vicinity of the waterfall. Remarkably, the suicide of Jane Riley is not the only tragic event to take place at Albion Falls. In the 1940s, It is said that a truck careened off a road and plunged over the precipice, killing a young girl in the process. And in the spring of 1946, Canadian socialite Evelyn Dick pushed the headless and limbless torso of her husband, whom she was suspected of murdering, over the falls. Number 56. Harrison Lake. Of all the lakes in the Great White North, among the spookiest is Harrison Lake, located between the eastern edge of Greater Vancouver and the Fraser Canyon. Sometimes referred to as the Sasquatch capital of Canada, Harrison Lake and the adjacent Agassiz-Harrison Valley were the settings of some of Canada's most famous Sasquatch encounters, most of which took place in the early 20th century. In May 1909, for example, a Chehalis Indian man named Peter Williams claimed to have been chased by a Sasquatch at the foot of Mount Keenan, a mountain located at the southwestern end of Harrison Lake. In September 1941, a large male Sasquatch repeatedly harassed the Chapmans, a Chehalis family who lived in a cabin southeast of Harrison Lake, stealing dried fish from their shed and shrieking outside their cabin in the night. The following month, residents of Port Douglas, at the northern end of Harrison Lake, fled in terror when a hairy, 14-foot-tall wild man sauntered into town and attempted to enter some of the houses. In addition to the many Sasquatch encounters said to have taken place there over the years, Harrison Lake is also the setting of several unsolved disappearances. Among the strangest of these is that of Raymond Selman, a 65-year-old outdoorsman who vanished while camping on the western shores of Harrison Lake. This case appears in David Paulides' 2019 book, Missing 411 Canada, and has been retold on the Coast to Coast AM radio show. Like many of the case studies Paulides presents in his books, the disappearance of Raymond Selman, upon closer investigation, is not quite as mysterious as the Missing 411 author makes it out to be. Nevertheless, the dramatic details of the story, coupled with the inexplicability of several of its particulars, as well as the storied setting in which it took place, invites consideration of whether there might be more to it than meets the eye. On the afternoon of May 28, 2013, Selman, apparently stranded on a certain small beach about 400 meters south of his impromptu campground, used his rifle to fire 3 shots into the air, and another 3 into 2 different vehicles, parked in other unofficial campgrounds about 500 meters away. Recipients of the gunfire, unaware of where the shots had come from, informed the RCMP. The police investigated the scene of the disturbance and found Selman's camper trailer empty, with his 2 dogs, Elmer and Bandit, whom his wife claimed he always took with him on his backcountry adventures, locked inside. Drawn by the sight of distress balloons, the RCMP found Selman's clothes, rifle, and spent shell casings on the beach from which he had fired the shots. Of the missing man, however, there was no sign. Police were also unable to find Selman's knife and belt, and suspected that the 65-year-old outdoorsman had used them to create a tourniquet, apparently being under the impression that he had badly injured himself. Operating on the assumption that Selman had attempted to swim to a more accessible stretch of beach, and had drowned in the process, an Idaho couple, equipped with a remotely operated underwater vehicle, scoured that part of Harrison Lake for the woodsman's body, but was unable to find any trace of him. To date, Raymond Selman's fate remains a mystery. Number 57. Nahanni Valley. Of all the creepy places I've researched over the years, the Nahanni Valley, in the southwestern corner of Canada's Northwest Territories, is by far the most fascinating. Nestled in the Mackenzie Mountains, this remote subarctic hideaway garnered national attention in the early 1900s, when the bodies of 2 brothers, who had gone up the South Nahanni River to prospect for gold, were found headless on the riverbank. Other prospectors met similar fates throughout the 20th century, prompting newspapermen to dub the region the Headless Valley. The legends of the Nahanni Valley include tales of Indian curses, evil spirits, lost gold mines, lost tribes, a tropical oasis, prehistoric monsters, brutal cavemen, hairy head-hunting giants with red eyes, and a mysterious white queen.